Hey, you made it back. I'm glad you did. Go ahead and get comfortable. Pull that blanket up a little further if you need to. Adjust your pillow. Find the position where your whole body can just let go, where the mattress holds you and the darkness behind your eyelids is soft and not scary. Not yet, anyway. We've got time. We're going to take this slow tonight, you and me. I want you to know something before we begin. I want you to know that I am glad you're here, genuinely glad, because there's something about sharing these kinds of stories that makes them easier to carry. I've been holding on to some of these for a long time, years in some cases, and the thing about holding a story like this alone is that it never quite loses its weight. It just sits there, somewhere behind your ribs, pressing quietly, reminding you now and then that you know something about the world that you didn't know before, that the world has edges you hadn't seen yet, that certain nights and certain roads and certain stretches of silence are shaped differently than everything around them. Texas will do that to you. I've lived here most of my life, and I can tell you honestly that there is no place on earth quite like it. And I mean that in the beautiful way as much as I mean it in the other way, because Texas is enormous. You already know that, I am sure. You've heard the jokes, you've seen the maps, but there's knowing something intellectually, and there's knowing it in your body. And until you've driven 8 or 9 hours through this state, and barely crossed half of it, until you've stood on a flat stretch of land in West Texas, where the horizon goes on so long in every direction that you feel the curvature of the earth, until you've been on a 2-lane road at 2 in the morning with nothing on either side for 40 miles, and had your headlights feel like the only light in existence, you don't really know what I am talking about. And in that enormousness, in all that space, things happen, people get lost, situations turn sideways. The darkness out here isn't just the absence of light, it's something with weight, it's something that presses in. So if you're new here, welcome. I am so glad you found this. If you've been here before, you know what we do. We sit together in the dark and we talk about the things that made us afraid, and somehow, I still don't entirely understand how it helps. If you feel like leaving a comment tonight, I love reading them. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. We do this every week. Well, be here, now. Let me tell you about the first time Texas genuinely scared me. I mean the deep kind of scared, not the jump scare kind, not the horror movie kind, the kind that sits in your chest for weeks and changes the way you look at ordinary things. It was a Friday night in late October. I was 24 years old. I was living in a small apartment in San Marcos, just finishing up my last semester at school, and I had agreed to drive up to Austin to meet some friends at a bar off 6th Street. I remember being in a good mood that night. One of those moods that feels almost unearned, where everything is just slightly more vivid, the air smells better, the music on the radio sounds exactly right. I had the windows down even though it was cool enough that I probably should have had them up. The interstate was mostly clear. I remember seeing the lights of Austin rise up out of the flat dark ahead of me, this orange glow that bloomed slowly on the horizon, and thinking that it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. Just that ordinary sight, a city at night. I parked in a garage on Red River and walked the few blocks down to meet my friends. There were 4 of us that night, me, my friend Marcus, a girl named Delia, who I'd known since freshman year, and a guy named Paul, who I didn't know quite as well, a friend of Marcus from his old neighborhood. Paul was quiet at first. Not uncomfortably quiet, just the kind of quiet that some people have when they're in a new group, taking everyone in, deciding where they fit. He had one of those faces that was hard to read, not unpleasant, just neutral, like a door that doesn't tell you what's behind it. We had a good time that night, at least for the first few hours. Loud music, a couple of drinks, the kind of conversation that doesn't go anywhere deep but feels warm and easy. Delia was in her element. She loved crowds, loved the noise, was always the one laughing the loudest and pulling everyone closer to the bar. Marcus was telling some long story about his boss that kept getting interrupted by the noise and having to be restarted. I was happy. I was genuinely just happy to be there, in the middle of all of it, feeling like a normal 24-year-old on a Friday night. It was sometime after midnight that things started to feel different. Not dramatically, not all at once, just slightly off, in the way that a note played just barely out of tune is off. You don't always consciously register it. Your ear just keeps waiting for something that doesn't come. The first thing I noticed was Paul. He had relaxed over the course of the evening, which made sense. We'd all had a couple of drinks. The music was good. The mood was light. But there was something about the way he'd relaxed that felt, I don't know, uncalibrated. Like when a machine has been running slowly, and then its speed suddenly corrects, and you realize the previous speed had been wrong. He was laughing a lot. Too much maybe. Not in a drunk way. He'd only had 2 beers as far as I could tell, but in a way that seemed slightly ahead of the actual humor of the situation. Like he was laughing at the idea of something being funny, rather than at the thing itself. I noticed this, and then told myself I was being ridiculous. He was just a guy having a good time. I was probably just slightly tired, and reading too much into things because that's what I do sometimes. I let it go. We decided around 1 in the morning to move to a different bar, a smaller place down the street that Marcus knew about. The 4 of us walked together, Delia and Marcus a few paces ahead, talking about something I wasn't quite following, and Paul walking alongside me. He said something about the night air, about how he always liked October better than any other month, about something in the quality of the cold that felt right to him. I agreed, because that's the kind of thing you agree with easily. I said something about how Austin always had a particular energy this time of year, and he nodded and said yes, yes exactly, and then he looked at me with this expression that I can only describe as evaluating. The way you'd look at something you were considering buying. And then he smiled, and the smile was fine. It was just a smile, but it lasted about 2 seconds longer than it needed to. I remember the exact physical sensation of that moment, a coolness that started somewhere at the back of my skull and moved down the back of my neck. I looked away. I looked at Marcus and Delia. They were laughing about something. The street was full of people. There was music coming from open doors on both sides of us. Everything was normal. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was projecting something onto a perfectly ordinary person, because I was in the kind of slightly heightened mental state that comes from a couple of drinks and the low-level social noise of a crowded bar. I told myself that humans are pattern-matching machines, and sometimes we find patterns that aren't there, and that this was one of those times, and that I should stop being strange and just enjoy my night. We went into the smaller bar. It was quieter, which I liked. Low lighting, booths along the walls, a small stage at the far end where a guy with a guitar was playing something slow and country and not unpleasant. We found a booth. We ordered drinks. Delia was telling a story now, something about her sister's wedding planning, and Marcus was reacting with the appropriate levels of amusement and sympathy. Paul was sitting across from me. I was watching the musician on the stage. Everything was fine. And then Paul said something that stopped the temperature in the room for me. He said it quietly, not as part of the general conversation, just to me, while the others were laughing about something. He said, "You drove here alone tonight, right? From San Marcos?" Not asked, stated. I looked at him. He was looking at me with that same neutral expression, that same unreadable face. I said yes. I said yes. I drove up from San Marcos. He nodded like I'd confirmed something he already knew. And then he said, "The 35 is pretty empty that late at night," and smiled again, and turned back to the main conversation as if he hadn't said anything at all. I sat there for a moment. I tried to process it. I tried to find the innocent version of what had just happened, and I almost managed it. Maybe Marcus had mentioned it. Maybe the topic had come up earlier, and I'd forgotten. Maybe Paul was just making the kind of empty small talk that people make, noting something obvious about a route that everyone in that part of Texas knows is a pretty straight shot. But the way Head said it, the particular quiet of it, the way it felt directed like Head leaned out of the group conversation specifically to say that one thing to me, and then leaned back in, like Head wanted me to know that he knew. I didn't finish my drink that night. I made excuses around 1:30. Said I had an early morning, which was a lie but felt necessary. I said my goodbyes to Delia and Marcus. I nodded to Paul. I walked back to my car at a pace that I was very careful to make look casual. even though every single nerve in my body was telling me to move faster. I sat in the parking garage for a few minutes before I left. I sat in the car with all the doors locked, and I just breathed. The concrete pillars of the garage were orange in the fluorescent light. There was nobody else around. My hands on the steering wheel were slightly unsteady, not shaking, just not entirely still. I drove back to San Marcos that night with my phone on the seat beside me, my doors locked, and my mirrors checked every few minutes. The 35 was empty, just like Paul had said. I didn't see another car for long stretches. The scrubland on either side of the road was invisible in the dark, except for the thin border that my headlights made along the edge. I drove at exactly the speed limit. I kept the radio off. I needed to hear everything. I got home at 2:45. I locked my apartment door and sat on my couch in the kitchen light and thought about what had happened and tried to decide if anything had actually happened. Maybe nothing had. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I would feel silly about this in the morning. I didn't feel silly about it in the morning. The feeling didn't leave that fast. I texted Marcus the next day, carefully, trying not to sound crazy. I asked him how he knew Paul, how long they'd been friends, where Paul was from. Marcus said they'd met through a mutual friend, that Paul was from somewhere around Beaumont, that he was a good guy. Marcus had known him a few years. I asked if Paul had known I was coming that night, if the group had talked about who was driving from where. Marcus said he might have mentioned it. Yeah, when they were making plans. He wasn't sure. That was probably it. That was almost certainly it. Marcus had mentioned it, and Paul had simply been making conversation, and I had, in my slightly tired, slightly drink-blurred state, turned a nothing moment into something that felt like a threat. That's the most rational explanation. That's the one I mostly chose to believe. But here is the thing about the body. The body is not always interested in the most rational explanation. The body has its own record of things. And my body, in the weeks that followed, remembered that smile, the one that lasted 2 seconds too long, the particular quiet in which he had said those words, the way he had looked at me like he was confirming information he had gathered from somewhere. I never saw Paul again. I don't know if that means anything. I don't know if any of it means anything. But I think about it sometimes when I am on the 35 at night, when the road is empty and the scrubland is dark, and the headlights are the only thing between me and all of that black open space. I think about how easy it would be, in a state this size, to be the only car on a road for 20, 30, 40 miles, and not a single person in the world would know exactly where you were. I think about that. And then I turn the radio on, and I check my mirrors, and I keep driving. I have never been the kind of person who's scared easily. I want you to know that. I say it not to sound tough, because fear is nothing to be ashamed of. I know that too, but because it's relevant context. I grew up in a family that was practical about things. My dad was a contractor, my mom was a nurse, and between the two of them, I got a pretty early education in the fact that the world has real dangers in it, and the useful response to real danger is not panic, but clear-headedness. I was taught to pay attention. I was taught to trust my gut, but also to check my gut against the facts. That combination of things, instinct and verification, is probably what kept me out of worse situations than the one with Paul. Because the older I've gotten, the more I've learned that instinct and paranoia are not the same thing, even though they can feel similar from the inside. But sometimes you can be both right and helpless at the same time. That's the lesson I am still working on, the one that the next story taught me most directly. I was 27 when I moved to Beaumont for work. I know. The coincidence of that is not lost on me, and I'll let you sit with it for a moment. But Paul was from somewhere around Beaumont, and I moved to Beaumont 3 years later, and for the first few weeks I was there, I was half expecting to see his face somewhere in a grocery store, in a parking lot, at a gas station, and I never did. I think it was just a coincidence. I think the world is full of coincidences, especially in a state this size, and the brain loves to give them meaning they don't have. Beaumont sits in the far east of Texas, right up near the Louisiana border, and it has a quality to it that's different from the rest of the state. It's more humid, more green, more enclosed. The air there has weight to it. It's not the clean, dry air of the hill country or the desert flatness of West Texas. It's subtropical and close, and in the summer, it presses down on you like a hot hand. The Spanish moss on the trees, the bayous that run through and around the city, the way the light in the afternoon comes through the canopy of oaks at a low amber angle, it has a beauty that is genuine, but that also carries something murky in it, something that doesn't quite let you see all the way to the bottom. I had a job there with a logistics company, nothing glamorous, lots of spreadsheets and inventory management, and calls with suppliers. I was renting a small house in a quiet neighborhood about 10 minutes from the office, a brick ranch-style house on a street with big pecan trees and a few other rentals mixed in with owner-occupied homes. My neighbors on the left were a retired couple named the Hendersons who grew tomatoes in the summer and waved every morning. On the right was a house that had been empty when I moved in and that I was told was between tenants. The house on the right was empty for the first 2 months I was there. Then, in late March, someone moved in. I didn't meet them right away. The moving truck came on a Saturday when I was out, and when I came home there was a light on in the house next door and a few boxes still on the porch. I thought I saw a shape in the front window, someone standing at the glass looking out, but when I looked again, there was nothing there. I told myself I'd imagined it. Over the next week or so, I caught glimpses of my new neighbor, but never quite a full look. A figure in the backyard, early in the morning. A car in the driveway, a dark blue sedan, older model that wasn't there some days and was there others. The lights on at strange hours. Not alarming, not on their own, just not quite establishing a pattern I could read. I want to describe the neighborhood for you so you understand it properly. It was one of those streets that had probably been quite lively 20 years earlier and was now aging into a kind of quiet. The Hendersons were in their 70s and spent most of their time inside by early evening. The family across the street had young kids and kept a strict routine: lights out by 9, cars in the driveway every night. The other houses were mostly occupied by single people or older couples who kept to themselves. It was not unfriendly. It was just quiet. The kind of quiet where you notice things because there's not a lot of noise to cover them. I finally properly met my neighbor on a Tuesday evening in early April. I was coming home from work, pulling my car into my driveway, and she was coming out of her front door at the same moment. She was a woman somewhere in her mid-40s, I'd guess, with dark hair cut short and very pale skin that looked like it belonged in a cooler climate than Southeast Texas. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt despite the warmth. She saw me getting out of my car and stopped on her porch and looked at me. She didn't wave right away. She just looked. And then, after a moment, she smiled and raised a hand. I walked over to introduce myself because that's what you do. I am still not sure that was the right decision, even now. I told her my name, told her I was renting next door, said it was nice to have a neighbor again since the house had been empty. She told me her name was Karen. She said she'd just moved from Louisiana, from somewhere near Shreveport, and that she was starting a new chapter. She said that phrase, starting a new chapter, in a way that landed flatly, without the warmth that phrase usually carries. Like she was reading from a script rather than telling me something true. She was pleasant enough. Her voice was quiet, a little hoarse, as if she didn't use it often or had been sick recently. She didn't ask many questions about me, which I noticed but didn't think much of at the time. Some people are just inward-facing. We talked for maybe 5 minutes, the normal neighborly preamble, the neighborhood, the weather, how she was finding the heat, and then we said goodbye and went inside our respective houses. I thought about her a little that evening. Not obsessively, just the normal processing you do when you've met someone new. Shed seemed tired. Shed seemed like someone who was carrying something. That wasn't unusual. Lots of people who were starting a new chapter were also trying to close a painful one. I decided she was probably going through a divorce or a loss of some kind, and that I would be a good neighbor and give her space. What I started noticing over the following weeks was harder to articulate. It was a cumulative thing, a collection of small observations that individually would have meant nothing, but that together, in the particular way they arranged themselves, started to produce a low-level unease in me that I couldn't quite shake loose. The first was the timing of her movement. She didn't seem to go to work. Her car was always in the driveway, except for a few hours every week, usually in the middle of the day, when it would disappear and come back. She didn't have regular hours. She didn't have the rhythm of someone with a job or a schedule. She was just there, in the house, most of the time. Again, not alarming on its own. Maybe she worked from home. Maybe she was between jobs. Maybe she was independently comfortable financially. The second thing was the windows. Her house was a mirror image of mine, more or less. And I knew from being in my own house how the rooms were laid out and roughly what a lit window at night would mean in terms of which room it was. Her bedroom window, which faced the side of my house, had a light on every night when I went to bed, not just on late, on all night. I noticed this because I have insomnia sometimes, and I'd be up at 2, 3 in the morning, and that window would be lit, every time, like she never slept, or like she slept with every light on. The third thing was the backyard. My back porch faces her back porch, and in the evenings sometimes I'd sit outside with a book, or just to sit, and I'd notice her standing in her backyard, not doing anything, not gardening, not on her phone, not looking at anything in particular, just standing there, in the middle of the yard, facing slightly away from me. Sometimes for 20 minutes at a stretch, I'd look up from my book, and she'd be there, and I'd look up again later, and she'd still be there, and then at some point she'd be gone, and I wouldn't have seen her leave. I had a conversation with myself about each of these things. I told myself the work from home thing made perfect sense. I told myself lots of people sleep with lights on. I told myself that standing in your own backyard, however motionless, is your business and nobody else's. I was not this woman's therapist or her judge. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't bothering me. She was just there. The thing that finally broke through my self-reassurance happened on a Thursday night in May. I had been sitting at my kitchen table after dinner, laptop open, trying to finish a report for work, and I heard something that I couldn't immediately place, a sound from outside, from the side of the house that faced Karen's property. Not loud, barely there actually, but in the particular quiet of that street at 10 o'clock at night, it carried. It was a voice, low, murmuring, not quite audible as words, coming from right outside my kitchen window. I sat very still for a moment. The kitchen window was closed, it was warm out, but I had the AC running, so the voice was muffled. But it was definitely a voice, and it was definitely right outside my window, not passing by on the sidewalk, stationary. I got up from the table slowly and moved to the side of the window, staying out of the direct sight line, and I looked out. Karen was standing in the narrow strip of yard between our two houses, right next to my kitchen window, facing away from me. She was speaking quietly, not into a phone as far as I could tell. Her hands were at her sides, just speaking, into the air. I watched her for a long minute, my heart doing something strange and arrhythmic in my chest. She didn't move, just spoke, quiet and continuous, the words indistinct through the glass. Then she stopped, stood completely still for a moment, and walked back around the front of her house. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in bed and listened to the night sounds, and tried to find the rational explanation. She'd been on a phone call, and I couldn't see the phone from my angle. She was talking to a pet, a cat or a dog, that I hadn't known about. She was someone who spoke out loud to herself. There are people who do that. It's not uncommon. It can actually be a self-soothing behavior. I tried every explanation. I almost convinced myself. What I couldn't quite work into any of the explanations was the proximity to my window. If you're making a phone call, or talking to yourself, or talking to a pet in your own backyard, you don't stand right up against your neighbor's kitchen window to do it. There's no reason for that positioning. Your own side of the property is sufficient, unless the window is what you wanted to be near, unless you wanted to be close to what was on the other side of the glass. I want to tell you about the next thing that happened, but I need you to understand the context first, because the context is what makes it what it is. Beaumont sits near the Neches River, and in certain parts of the city and the county around it, there are these low-lying areas where the land gets soft and marshy, where you can be driving on a perfectly normal road and suddenly the standing water on both sides, black and opaque, and the cypress trees lean over it with their knees in the water, and the Spanish moss hangs down, and the whole scene looks like something from 100 years ago, like the land is remembering something. I had started taking evening walks in the neighborhood to decompress after work, usually around 8 o'clock when the worst of the heat had subsided. My standard route took me down to the end of my street, left along a larger road, and then through a small park area that had a paved trail running alongside a drainage bayou. It was pleasant enough in the lingering summer light. Other people walked there, dogs, families sometimes. The bayou smelled like mud and green things, which sounds unpleasant, but is actually just earthy and alive and not wrong. About 3 weeks after the night I'd seen Karen at my window, I was on this walk, somewhere around 8:30, the light just starting to soften into gold, and I was maybe a quarter mile along the trail when I realized that the woman roughly 100 yards behind me on the trail was Karen. I slowed slightly to let her catch up enough to acknowledge, because that seemed like the natural thing to do. She came closer, and I saw that, yes, it was her, wearing the same long-sleeved shirt she seemed to favor regardless of temperature, her hands in her pockets. She said hello. I said hello. We walked together for a few minutes and made the kind of conversation that you make. She mentioned the heat. I mentioned the heat. She said she'd been trying to get out more. I said that sounded good. And then she said, after a pause that lasted a beat too long, "I've been watching you walk this route. It's a nice one." She said it pleasantly, conversationally, like it was a normal thing to say. I felt the air go out of me a little. I kept my face neutral. I said something like, "Yes, it was a nice route. I'd been doing it a few weeks." I said I usually went a little further along before turning back. She nodded and said she knew. I'm not sure she heard what she'd just said, or maybe she heard it and didn't care. We walked together to the end of the trail section, and I made my excuses and turned back early, saying I had something to finish at home. She stood at the end of the trail and watched me walk back. I didn't look over my shoulder to see that. I felt it. When I finally rounded the corner out of her sight line, I walked faster, not running, just faster. That night I called my friend Delia and told her everything, all of it, the window, the standing in the yard, the walking trail comment. Delia listened, and she didn't dismiss it, which I was grateful for, but she also didn't know what to tell me. She said it sounded unsettling. She said I should trust my gut. She said if anything more concrete happened, I should talk to someone, my landlord, or the non-emergency police line, something. The problem with that advice, which I understood even as she gave it, was that nothing I had to report was actually illegal or even objectively alarming. A woman standing in her own yard, a woman using the neighborhood walking trail, a woman making a comment about watching her neighbor's routine that could be read as nothing more than slightly odd small talk. There is no crime in any of that. There is no report to make. There is just the feeling in your chest that something is wrong, and the feeling in your chest is not evidence of anything. I lived in that house for 4 more months after that. I kept my blinds closed on the side facing Karen's house. I changed my walk route to one that didn't pass the trail. I was friendly when I saw her, carefully, deliberately friendly, in the way that you are when you want to give nothing away and take nothing in. She seemed to understand the new distance I was maintaining. She didn't push against it. She just watched. From her front porch sometimes when I was coming and going. From her backyard, which I could see less of now that I kept the blinds drawn. When I moved out in September, I'd been planning to go back to the hill country area. Had a new job lined up in New Braunfels. I felt an ease come back into my body that I hadn't realized had been absent the whole time I'd been there. Like I'd been holding something tightened in my chest for months and had finally been allowed to let it go. I didn't tell Karen I was moving. The morning the movers came, I was up before 6, trying to get everything organized, and when I came outside with the first load of boxes, Karen was sitting on her front porch in the early morning dark, not on her phone, not doing anything, just sitting, watching me load the truck. She watched us work for 3 hours. She never said a word. When the truck pulled away and I locked my door for the last time and walked to my car, she was still on the porch. I looked at her and gave a small wave. She raised her hand but didn't wave it, just held it up like she was measuring something. I got in my car and I drove away, and I did not look in the rearview mirror. I have never been back to that street in Beaumont. I don't know if Karen is still there. I don't know what she was, or what she wanted, or if she wanted anything at all. And I was simply a person who was so attuned to wrongness that I manufactured it from ordinary eccentricity. I genuinely don't know. What I know is that for those 4 months, I never once felt safe in that house. And I know that safety is not a small thing. It's not an abstract thing. It's the difference between sleeping and lying awake listening to every small sound. It's the difference between a home and a place you happen to occupy while keeping your guard up. Safety is what lets you be human. Without it, you're just an animal trying to stay alive. And there is nothing in this life quite as exhausting as that. There's something I've come to believe about the particular flavor of fear that comes, not from something obviously monstrous, but from something that might be completely innocent. Because that kind of fear is harder to resolve. When something is clearly dangerous, you can act. You can run, you can fight, you can call for help. But when something is only possibly wrong, when the threat is wrapped in normalcy and plausible deniability, you're left with just the feeling, just the weight of it. No outlet, no resolution, no permission to be afraid. That combination, the feeling with no permission, is its own particular torment. And I've experienced it more than once in Texas, more than I'd like. The uncertainty is what gets inside you and stays. But there are also times when you are not uncertain at all. Times when the world removes all ambiguity and shows you exactly what it is. And those moments are both better and worse. Better because at least you know. Worse because you can't pretend otherwise. I want to tell you about a night on Highway 285 in West Texas, the Trans-Pecos region. If you've been there, you know what I mean when I say it is the most beautiful and the most indifferent landscape I have ever been in. Nothing cares about you out there, not in a hostile way, just in the way that a desert doesn't care, the way a mountain doesn't care, the way enormous things that have been there for millions of years and will be there for millions more don't bother to register your specific existence. And there is something clarifying about that. During the day, under the full press of the West Texas sun, with the Chihuahuan desert spreading in every direction, and the sky so blue and so wide it makes your eyes ache. Clarifying. Humbling. Good for you, probably. At night it's different. I was 29. I had driven out to Big Bend for a long weekend solo trip. It was June, which is not the recommended time to visit Big Bend. If you care about comfort, the temperatures in the canyon during the day are serious, genuinely dangerous if you're not prepared. And I had done my homework and packed accordingly. But I had chosen June specifically because the crowds were thin, and the nights, despite the day heat, dropped to something almost cool in the higher elevations. And because I'd heard that the night sky in Big Bend in the summer was one of the last truly dark skies left in the lower 48, and I wanted to see it. I had planned to drive down on a Friday, spend Saturday and Sunday in the park, and drive back Monday morning. The drive from San Antonio, where I was living at the time, to Big Bend is roughly 4.5 hours, most of it on 2-lane highways through country that gets progressively emptier and more austere as you go. Alpine, Marfa, Marathon, these small towns are the last markers of human concentration before the park closes around you. Beyond them, it's just the land and the road. I left San Antonio at 3 in the afternoon and stopped for gas in Marathon, which is the last real stop before the park entrance. The gas station there is small and well-worn, the kind of place that stocks the basics and a lot of souvenirs. And the woman behind the counter was the kind of West Texas woman who has been in that desert, her whole life weathered and economical with words, and utterly at ease with the silence around her. I asked her if the road into the park was clear, and she said it was, and told me to watch for deer at dusk near the entrance, that they'd been bad this season. I thanked her and got back in my car. The drive from Marathon down to the park entrance is about 40 miles on Highway 385, and I drove it as the sun was going down, which meant I had that particular West Texas sunset happening to my right, the whole way a spectacle of color that I don't have good enough words for, orange and red and violet happening simultaneously across a sky that was 3 times bigger than it should have been. I pulled over once just to stand outside and look at it. There was no other car on the road. The desert was completely still, and the last of the heat was coming off the pavement in visible waves. and the sky above me was doing that thing it does out there where it seems to go on forever, in every direction, like the earth is a small thing in the bottom of an enormous bowl of light. I got to my campsite in the Chisos Basin just after dark, set up my tent, made a simple camp dinner, and then did exactly what I came to do. I lay on top of my sleeping bag and looked up at the sky through my mesh tent ceiling and watched the Milky Way do what it does in places without light pollution, which is to say, it blazed. It was not the faint suggestion of the Milky Way that you see from a city, or even the slightly more visible band you see from the suburbs. It was a full white river of light directly overhead, thick and bright, and so real it felt like something you could reach up and put your hand through. I lay there for a long time. I don't know how long. The stars moved slowly, the way they do when you're watching long enough to see it, rotating around Polaris like a slow ancient wheel. And I thought about how old all of that light was, and how far it had traveled, and how absurdly small and temporary everything on this planet was by comparison. It was one of the best nights of my life. I want you to understand that before I tell you about Sunday. Saturday was everything I'd hoped for. I hiked the South Rim Trail in the early morning, before the heat built, came back to camp for lunch and a rest, went back out in the late afternoon when it cooled to watch the sunset from the Window Trail viewpoint. I ate well. I drank enough water. I slept deeply that night, the deep, dreamless sleep of someone whose body has been used well. Sunday I planned a longer drive down to the Rio Grande Village area to see the river, then across to the western side of the park, then out via the Maverick Entrance Road, and back to Marathon on 118 before it got dark. A loop. A full day in the landscape. I was feeling good, rested, clear-headed. I loaded up my car with water and food and sunscreen and drove out of the basin just after 7 in the morning. Everything through the morning and early afternoon was perfect. The river was green and still, and the reeds along the bank made a sound in the wind that was hypnotic, and I sat on the bank for a while and watched a great blue heron stand absolutely motionless in the shallows, with the absolute patience of something that doesn't know what impatience is. I drove the interior road slowly, windows down, the desert smells creosote and dry dust, and something faintly mineral coming in clear and good. I stopped at the Castellon store for cold water and a break in the shade. I watched 2 roadrunners chase each other across the parking lot. I was in a state of complete and uncomplicated happiness. It was when I turned north toward the Maverick Entrance that the day shifted. Not in a dramatic way. The sky had been developing high clouds since early afternoon, the kind that don't usually amount to much in this part of the desert, but that were giving the light a quality that was slightly flatter, slightly less golden than it had been. And the Maverick Road, is unpaved, about 22 miles of graded dirt that rolls through the open desert with virtually no shade and no facilities. I'd checked the road condition at the visitor center, and it was fine. It had been recently graded, but it was still a remote road on which you were entirely on your own if something went wrong. I was about 8 miles in when I noticed that the rear of my car was handling slightly differently, not dramatically, just a subtle mushiness in the back that hadn't been there before. I slowed down and pulled to the side of the road, which wasn't really the side of a road so much as a marginally different part of the same continuous flat ground. And I got out and looked at my rear driver's side tire. It was flat. Not catastrophically, aggressively flat. It hadn't blown out. It had just gradually, quietly lost enough air that the sidewall was beginning to compress in a way that was going to cause serious damage if I kept driving on it. I crouched down and looked at it and felt the particular sinking feeling of being in a very remote place when something goes wrong. I had a spare. This is important. I had packed for this trip properly, and I had a full-size spare in my trunk, and I knew how to change a tire. I wasn't in any immediate danger. But it was 3 in the afternoon, and I was 8 miles down an unpaved road in West Texas in June, and it was about 102 degrees, and the nearest real help was 30-some-odd miles away. I was not panicking, but I was not comfortable either. I got out the jack and the spare and the tire iron and started the process. If you've never changed a tire in desert heat in the middle of the afternoon, I will tell you that it is something that demands all of your focus, and that you need to drink water before, during, and after, and that the ground radiates heat back up at you from below, while the sun presses down from above, and the whole experience has a particular intensity to it that is not quite suffering, but is adjacent to it. I was about 20 minutes into this process car, jacked up, lug nuts loose, flat tire half off, when I became aware of another vehicle on the road, coming from the direction of the park entrance, heading my way. I felt a flush of something that was mostly relief. Another person, another vehicle, maybe someone who could help, or at least provide the psychological comfort of not being completely alone. It was a pickup truck, old, dusty, the color of the desert itself, a tan brown that blended so completely with the surroundings that it had been almost invisible until it was close. It slowed as it approached me and stopped about 20 feet away. The driver was a man who I estimate was in his early 60s, sun-worn in the deep way of people who have spent their lives outside in that country, wearing a hat that had seen better decades. He put the truck in park, but left the engine running. He didn't get out right away. He looked at my situation from the cab for a moment, and I looked back at him, and then he opened his door and climbed down. He asked if I needed a hand. I said I thought I had it under control, but thank you. He nodded and said, "Head, just watch, in case. Make sure I had the right wrench seated properly, because the rocks out here could seat a lug nut crooked, and you didn't want to find that out at speed." That was reasonable. That was genuinely, completely reasonable. I said, "Okay, thank you, I appreciate it." He stood a few feet away while I finished removing the flat and started lining up the spare. He was quiet, not chatty, not intrusive, just present. He asked once where I was headed, and I said out through the Maverick entrance and back to Marathon. He nodded, and then, while I was on my knees lining up the spare tire on the hub, he said, "You're alone out here." It wasn't a question, it was an observation. The same kind of flat, informational delivery as what Paul had said to me in that Austin bar 5 years earlier. I felt the same cold thing move down the back of my neck. I kept my hands working. I said yes, solo trip. He was quiet again. I could see his boots from my low angle, unmoving, about 3 feet from where I was kneeling. I worked faster. Not frantically, I didn't want to make a mistake with the tire. I needed it to be right, but faster. He said, "Cell signal's no good out here. Probably know that." I said yes, I knew that. He said nothing else for a moment. I got the spare seated and started threading the lug nuts by hand, and then I reached for the tire iron, and my hand closed on empty air. I looked up. The tire iron was on the ground to my right. It had rolled a few inches from where ID put it. I reached for it. His boot was 2 inches from the tire iron. I don't know if Head moved it. I don't know if it had just rolled there. The ground was not flat. The terrain was slightly uneven, and things roll on uneven ground. I picked it up and went back to tightening the lug nuts, and my hands were not entirely steady. He said, "Where are you staying tonight?" I said I was heading back to San Antonio. He said, "Long drive." I said yes. I finished the lug nuts, lowered the jack, gathered my tools, and got to my feet. I was acutely, physically aware of where he was in relation to me the entire time, where his hands were, where my car door was, how fast I could move if I needed to. I thanked him for stopping. I kept my voice even and normal. I said I really appreciated it. He looked at me for a moment with dark, steady eyes, and then he said, "Stay on the road. There's a lot of nothing between here and the entrance." He got back in his truck. He sat there, engine running, while I put my tools away and got in my car and started it. I pulled forward. He didn't move. I looked in my mirror as I drove away, and he was still sitting there, parked, engine running, watching me go. He didn't follow me. I watched my mirrors for the entire remaining 14 miles to the entrance. He never appeared. When I hit the paved road, I breathed out completely for the first time in what felt like an hour, and my hands on the wheel were shaking slightly. The way hands shake not from fear, but from the end of fear, from the body releasing what it's been holding. Was he dangerous? I don't know. I genuinely, honestly don't know. Maybe he was a rancher or a park regular who stopped to help a stranded motorist because that's what you do out in remote country. Maybe the things he said were just the things an older man in West Texas says, flat, factual, delivered without social softening, because that's the communication style of the desert. Maybe the tire iron had just rolled. Maybe he sat and watched me drive away because he wanted to make sure I got moving all right. Maybe. But I had been completely alone, 8 miles from the nearest road, in a place with no cell signal. And this man had known all of that before I said a word. And there had been something in the way he stood, the particular stillness of him, that had my body in a state of screaming alertness. For the 25 minutes we were together, my body did not read him as a helpful stranger. And my body, in my experience, is a very well-calibrated instrument. I drove back to Marathon in the fading afternoon, and I sat in the parking lot of the gas station for a while. I went inside and bought a bottle of cold water and stood in the air conditioning and let myself feel all the things I'd been holding very tightly for the past half hour. The woman behind the counter, not the same one as before, a different shift, looked at me and asked if I was all right. I told her ID had a tire go out on the Maverick Road. She nodded sympathetically and said that road 8 tires, and I was lucky ID had a spare. I said yes. I said I was lucky. I drove back to San Antonio that evening under the darkening sky, and I thought about what luck means, about how thin the line is between a story that ends normally and a story that doesn't, about all the variables, the spare tire, the daylight that had still been present, the fact that his truck had driven up and not simply stopped behind me while I wasn't looking, the fact that ID kept my body language calm and given nothing away. All those things on one side of the line, and nothing concrete had happened. Nothing. And I still know that something was different about that man in a way I can't prove and will never be able to prove, and that knowing sits in me like a stone. I think about it every time I drive through West Texas, which I still do, because West Texas is one of the most beautiful places in the world, and I refuse to be kept from it, but I drive it differently now. I make sure my tires are in perfect shape before I go. I always have a full spare. I tell someone specifically where I'm going and when I expect to arrive, and I check in along the way wherever signal allows. These are not paranoid precautions. They are reasonable ones. They are the precautions of someone who has learned that remoteness is not romantic when something goes wrong. Remoteness is just distance from help. That's all it is. And it's not just the roads and the desert out here. The cities have their own version of it. The particular loneliness of a big city at the wrong hour in the wrong neighborhood is a different kind of remoteness, surrounded by people and architecture and light, and somehow still completely alone. That paradox is something I've felt more than once in Houston, which is a city I spent 2 years living in and that I still don't entirely understand. Houston is enormous in the way that Texas is enormous, but condensed, sprawling in every direction, highways stacked above highways, neighborhoods bleeding into each other with no clear boundary, a place that defies easy categorization. It's the most diverse city in America, or close to it, and that diversity produces a texture and a richness that is genuinely astonishing if you know where to look. I loved parts of it deeply, the food, the museums, the incredible hybrid energy of it. But Houston has a shadow side that comes out after midnight in certain parts of town, and I encountered it about 6 months into my time there. I was working late. I worked late a lot in those years. I was ambitious, in the way that 28-year-olds can be, before they learn the real cost of it, and it was a Thursday night, close to 1 a.m, and I had been at the office for about 16 hours, and I was done, completely done, operating on the kind of depleted mental energy that makes everything feel slightly unreal. I had parked that morning in a lot about 4 blocks from my office, because the closer lots had been full, and I was walking those 4 blocks to my car in what is nominally a business district, but at 1 a.m, is just a collection of dark office buildings and empty streets. I was on the 2nd block when I became aware that there was someone keeping pace with me on the other side of the street. The streets were not well lit there. The kind of ambient city glow that fills most of Houston was present in the distance from the cluster of lit buildings further downtown, but here in this in-between zone of office parks and parking structures, the light was thin and the shadows were heavy. The person on the other side of the street was in those shadows, more shadow than person, but I could see the movement, a consistent, human walking pace that matched mine exactly. I told myself it was nothing, someone walking to their own car, someone going home from a late shift. There was no reason that two people couldn't be walking on a quiet street at the same time, heading in the same direction. I kept my pace. I turned right at the next intersection, taking the route to my lot. The figure on the other side of the street turned right at the same intersection, still on the other side, still in the shadow, still the same pace. My heart rate had been climbing without my full conscious awareness, the way it does when the body gets ahead of the mind. I noticed it now. I registered the cold sharpness that had replaced the dull, tired fog of the previous hour. Fear is a remarkable alertness drug. All my fatigue was gone. I sped up slightly, not running, speeding up, the way you do when you want to test a theory. The shadow on the other side of the street sped up. I slowed down. The shadow slowed down. I stopped entirely and pretended to check my phone. The shadow stopped, stood there in the partial dark across the street, not moving. I looked directly at it. I couldn't make out features. The distance and the light were wrong for that. Just a shape. A standing human shape at rest on the other side of an empty street at 1 a.m, watching me. I calculated. My car was half a block further. The lot had a gate with an attendant booth, but I didn't know if anyone was in the booth at this hour. I'd never been here this late. If the attendant was there, I was almost safe. If I could get to the gate, I was almost safe. The lot itself would be enclosed, lit, and I could get in my car and lock the doors. I started walking again. Not faster. I didn't want to run, because running in that situation commits you to a chase dynamic that you do not want to be part of. I walked at a pace that was purposeful and not panicked, but also not casual. The shadow started walking again. I reached the lot. The gate was closed. The booth was lit. There was a person in it, an older man reading something, barely looking up. I walked up to the window. I said my ticket number or my card. I honestly don't remember the payment details. My brain was elsewhere. I said it, and he processed it, and started to buzz the gate open, and I said, trying to keep my voice normal, "There's someone following me. Can you keep an eye out?" The attendant looked up from his screen. He looked at me, and then he looked at the street behind me. I looked too. The far side of the street was empty. He looked back at me with the expression of someone deciding whether to be concerned or dismissive. He said he hadn't seen anyone. He said the lot was camera monitored. I was safe here. He said it with a kind of studied carefulness that told me he'd had women say things like this to him before, that he had a script for it. I said thank you. I went to my car. I locked the doors. I sat there for 10 minutes before I drove anywhere. I never saw the figure again. Never found any explanation. It's possible it was completely innocent, a person who happened to be going in the same direction, who happened to match my pace changes because they were watching me make them, and were curious about the woman who seemed to be testing whether she was being followed. The coincidence of the turning, the pacing, the stopping, all explainable without malice if you try hard enough. I don't try hard enough anymore. I've done too much of that, and it doesn't actually make me feel better. So I acknowledge what my body told me that night, which was danger, and I am grateful I got to my car, and I leave the question of what might have happened if the lot gate had been unattended as a question that doesn't need an answer. Houston also gave me one of the strangest experiences I've ever had, one that is not cleanly a story about human danger, but that has never left me. That sits in the category of things I don't have a good explanation for, and that I try not to think about too carefully, because every time I think about it carefully, it makes me feel strange in the same way. And I am going to tell you about it now, because this is the place for these stories, the dark and the quiet, where the things that don't fit into the ordinary world can be said without embarrassment. I lived for those 2 Houston years in a small house in a neighborhood called Eastwood, east of downtown, a neighborhood of bungalows and craftsman homes in various states of upkeep, big pecan and oak trees, and a community of longer-term residents mixed with younger people who were being priced out of the trendier areas. I liked it there. My house was small, but it had a good porch, and my neighbors were friendly, and there was a taqueria 2 blocks away that I went to more than I should have. The house had been built in the 1940s and had the particular feeling of old houses, a density in the walls, a quality of sound absorption and transmission that newer construction doesn't have, a sense of having contained many lives before yours. I was aware of this in the background, but didn't think much of it. Old houses feel old. That's not inherently alarming. What I noticed first was something I noticed in the kitchen, and it was so minor that it barely registers as a thing at all. I would set something down on the kitchen counter, my keys, my phone, my coffee mug, and come back to find it very slightly, not where ID put it, not moved across the room, not dramatically displaced, just a few inches to the left or right of where ID placed it, consistently slightly off. The way things look if someone has moved them and then tried to put them back almost exactly where they were. I told myself it was me. I told myself I was misremembering the exact placement of things, which is not a strange thing to do. Nobody photographs their keys before they set them down. Nobody has perfect spatial memory for the mundane details of their own kitchen counter. I told myself this sensibly and believed it. Then I started noticing something else. In the mornings, before I was fully awake, in that liminal state between sleep and waking, where the brain hasn't yet assembled its full daylight defenses, I would hear something, a sound from the other side of the house, not every morning, maybe once a week. A sound that was so quiet and so brief that in the fullness of waking I couldn't quite hold on to what it had been. A sound like movement, like a careful footstep, like someone being very quiet about something. I would wake up fully and listen. The house would be completely still. I would lie there in the morning light, heart bumping, listening to the perfect silence of a house at 6 a.m., and I would try to reconstruct what ID heard. The sound of the house settling, a branch against the window, a dream sound brought forward from sleep. I was very creative in my explanations. The third thing was a smell. This one I can't explain away at all, and it's the one that still makes the back of my neck prickle when I think about it too directly. It was not a consistent smell. It appeared maybe 4 or 5 times over the course of those 2 years, always at night, always in the same part of the house, the narrow hallway that ran from the bedroom toward the living room. A smell that was sweet and slightly chemical, in a way that made me think of old things being preserved, or old things decaying, something between the two. Not rot exactly, not cleaner or detergent, something older than both of those. Something that didn't belong in a house that was regularly cleaned and aired. I would smell it, and I would stop whatever I was doing, and I would stand very still in the hallway, and the smell would be present for a few seconds, and then it would simply not be there anymore. Not fade, just stop, like someone turning off a light. I looked for explanations. I had the house checked for gas leaks. I had a pest control person out who found no evidence of anything in the walls or floor. I checked under the house, in the crawl space, and it was empty and dry, and smelled only of dust and concrete. There was no physical source that anyone could identify. The thing that I think about the most, happened about 3 months before I moved out of that house. I was asleep, and I woke up suddenly. Not gradually, the way you usually wake up, but all at once, like a light being switched on. I was lying on my back, looking at the ceiling, and it was dark in the room, but not the complete dark of a power outage. There was enough ambient light from the city coming through the curtains to see the ceiling and the upper part of the walls. There was something in the doorway of my bedroom. I need to be careful about how I describe this, because I want to be completely honest about what I saw and what I couldn't be sure of. It was a shape, darker than the dark around it, standing in the doorway, the shape of a person standing still. Not distinct, no features, no definition, just the shape, the particular interruption of the ambient light that a standing person makes. It was there for what felt like a long moment, but was probably only a few seconds. And then, it was not there. I turned on the bedside lamp immediately. The doorway was empty. The hallway beyond it was empty. I got up and turned on every light in the house and walked through every room. Nothing was disturbed. All the doors and windows were locked. There was no one in the house but me. I sat on the couch with every light on until the sun came up. I did not go back to sleep. And in the morning, in the reasonable light of day, I decided that I had woken from a dream without fully realizing it, and that the shape in the doorway was the last image of a dream projected onto my waking perception, the way that sometimes happens in the half state between sleep and full consciousness. That is almost certainly what it was. But sometimes, when I am in a dark hallway in an old house, and the light is wrong, and the silence has that particular texture, that dense, listening quality, I think about that doorway, and I wonder whether the shape I saw was something my dreaming brain made up, or whether it was something that had been there all along, in that house, walking quietly in the mornings and moving things by a few inches, and leaving brief traces of a smell that didn't belong to the world I knew. I moved out 3 months later, and the reason I give officially is that I got a better job offer back in the hill country area. Which is true, that is true. But there's also the other truth, which is that I had stopped being entirely comfortable in that house, and that a house you're not comfortable in is only a house and not a home, and a home is what I needed. I don't tell that story often, the ones involving other people, the ones where the threat wears a human face. Those I can tell, and know what I am telling I can say here, is the danger, and here is why I was afraid, and here is what it taught me. But the Eastwood House story lives in a different category, the category of things I experienced and cannot explain, and that I hold with a kind of careful neutrality. I don't say it was supernatural. I don't say it wasn't. I say I saw what I saw, and felt what I felt, and I would need more than I have to know what any of it meant. There is a particular kind of courage, I've found, in admitting that you don't know, that you had an experience, and it doesn't fit any frame you have for making sense of things, that something happened, and you can't resolve it, and you have to carry it unresolved. That takes more out of you, in some ways, than the resolvable things, because at least with those you can reach an explanation and file it somewhere. The unexplained ones just stay open. They stay open, and they stay with you, and occasionally they lean out of whatever corner they occupy and breathe cold air on the back of your neck. Let me come back to something solid, something with a clear geography, a clear timeline, a clear beginning and almost end, because the story I want to tell you now is one that I have turned over in my mind more times than almost any other experience in my life, not because of what happened though, that was bad enough, but because of how long it took me to understand what was happening, and how completely ordinary everything looked while it was happening. This was 2 years ago. I am in New Braunfels now, have been for about 3 years, and I love it there with a depth of feeling that I think comes partly from all the moving around I've done, all the cities and neighborhoods and houses, where I felt partially at home but never quite all the way. New Braunfels has the river and the limestone hills and the live oaks and a particular quality of air that I don't know how to describe, except that it feels like an exhale, like the land is breathing out. 2 years ago, I agreed to house sit for a friend of mine named Cassidy, who was going to her sister's wedding in Colorado for 10 days. Cassidy lives in a little town called Utopia, out in the hill country, about 50 miles southwest of San Antonio, and I'd been there several times, and loved it. Utopia is a genuinely small town, a few hundred people, one blinking light at the intersection, a feed store, a couple of small businesses, a river running alongside it, that in summer is clear and cold and lined with cypress trees. It is, as the name suggests, a beautiful place. And Cassidy had a farmhouse on about 20 acres outside of town that was everything I would have designed a life for myself: old stone construction, wide porches, a garden, 2 dogs and 3 cats, and fields that ran out to a tree line on the west side that went gold in the evening light. I was happy to do it. I love animals. I needed a change of scene, and the idea of 10 days in that farmhouse, with nothing to do but care for the animals and read and maybe hike a little, felt like a vacation from my own life. I drove out on a Tuesday afternoon. Cassidy showed me everything: the feeding schedules, the vet's number, where the spare key for the outbuilding was, how the old water heater was temperamental, and then she left Wednesday morning in a hurry because her flight was early. And I was alone on those 20 acres, which felt absolutely fine. The first 3 days were everything I'd hoped for. The dog's a cattle dog mix named Remy, and a black lab named Sister were good company, following me through the morning chores and sleeping at my feet in the evening. The cats were typically indifferent. I made coffee on the stone porch in the mornings and watched the deer come into the fields at first light, and in the evenings I watched the sky turn everything impossible colors over the western tree line. I cooked simple meals. I read. I slept deeply. By the fourth day ID settled into the rhythms of the place so completely that it felt like my own home, the way a really good place can start to feel after a few days when you let it. I knew which floorboard creaked in the hallway. I knew which of the 3 outdoor spigots the hose needed to come from for the garden. I knew that Remy would need to be called back from the far fence line every evening, or he'd spend the whole night out there. It was on the 5th day that I had the first indication that something was not entirely right, and it was so small, so completely dismissible, that I dismissed it immediately and completely, and only remembered it later in the context of everything else. I had taken the dogs for a long walk in the morning, down the unpaved lane that ran along Cassidy's east fence line and out to the county road, and then back in a loop through the bottom of the property. It was a beautiful walk, the early light through the live oaks, the dogs ranging ahead and coming back, the smell of cedar and warm limestone. I was in an excellent mood. I came back to the house, took my boots off on the porch, gave the dogs their water, and went inside to make breakfast. When I came into the kitchen, the back door, the door that opens from the kitchen onto the side yard, a door I was quite certain I had not used at all that morning, was unlocked. Not open. Locked it appears from the outside, and I was the only person with a key, but unlocked. I stood there and thought about it for a full minute. I walked through every action ID taken that morning. ID come downstairs, let the dogs out the front door, gone to the porch, we'd gone on the walk from the front of the property, come back in through the front. I had not touched the back door. I was quite certain of that. But sometimes we do things automatically, without full awareness, especially first thing in the morning. Maybe ID tried the back door when I was half asleep for some reason, and forgotten. Maybe the lock was old and sticky and had shifted on its own. Maybe Cassidy had left it unlocked, and ID been assuming it was locked without actually checking. I locked it. I filed it away as probably nothing. I made my breakfast. 2 days later, on the 7th day, I found something in the outbuilding. The outbuilding, Cassidy called it the equipment shed, sat about 100 yards from the house, past the garden, at the edge of the open space, before the west tree line. It held a riding mower, some tools, extra feed for the animals, and various other rural household necessities. I'd been in it twice to get feed. I had the spare key on Cassidy's key ring. I went out in the afternoon to get a specific tool I needed for a minor repair. On the garden gate, ID found a loose hinge, and I unlocked the shed and went in, and the light in there was dim, the way it always was. One bare bulb in the ceiling that ID learned was on a pull cord near the door. I pulled the cord, and the light came on, and everything was as it should be except for one thing. Near the back wall, where the feed bags were stacked, someone had made a small space. The bags had been rearranged, not knocked over, not scattered, but deliberately moved to create a cleared area in the corner, and in that cleared area was a folded moving blanket that was not Cassidy's. I had been in this shed enough to know what was in it. This blanket was not something I'd seen before. It was grey and thick and industrial looking, the kind of blanket movers use. I stood in the doorway looking at it for a long time. Here is what I thought. Homeless person. Transient. Someone had found the outbuilding unlocked, or maybe the lock was easy to open from the outside. I didn't know, and had been using it as shelter. Cassidy lived alone on a rural property with no visible neighbors. It was a reasonable hiding spot, and whoever it was had been careful. Nothing broken, nothing taken, just a space made and a blanket put down. This was a rational and not particularly alarming explanation. And the farm was clearly occupied now. I'd been there a week with lights on and smoke from the kitchen and dogs running the property. A transient would have moved on by now. I took the blanket and put it in the trash. I locked the shed carefully and checked the lock twice. I walked the perimeter of the property fence in the late afternoon, looking for any gaps or places where the fence was down. anywhere someone could enter easily from outside. The fence was mostly intact, some of the lower wire sagged in a few places, more than you'd want if you were keeping livestock, but sufficient as a basic boundary, nothing that looked like a regular point of entry. The dogs were with me on this perimeter walk, and I watched them carefully for any sign of alerting on a scent trail that led toward the property from outside. Remy was interested in everything in his usual diffuse way: cedar, deer, rabbits, the general rich inventory of the hill country, but nothing that seemed specifically directed or alarmed. Sister walked calmly. The dogs were fine. I cooked dinner that evening, and I was not as easy as I had been the previous evenings. Some of the warmth of the place had been replaced by a new awareness of its isolation. The tree line to the west, which had been a beautiful backdrop for sunsets, was now also a place from which someone could watch the house without being seen. The dark outside the windows, which had been comfortable and quiet and star-filled, was now also just dark, the kind of dark you can't see into, the kind of dark in which things can move without being visible. I called Cassidy. She didn't answer. It was wedding week and she was busy. I knew that. I left a message saying everything was fine with the animals, just checking in. I didn't mention the blanket. Not yet. I didn't want to alarm her while she was at her sister's wedding over something that was probably nothing. I slept that night with the bedroom door closed and Remy on the bed with me. He was happy about this arrangement. I was glad for his warmth and the particular alert steadiness of a working dog at rest, the sense that he was not entirely off duty, even while asleep. Nothing happened that night. The house was still and the dogs were calm, and the night passed normally. In the morning, I felt slightly foolish about the alert state I'd been in. The blanket had been there before I arrived. Whoever it was had seen a house that was clearly occupied for the past week and had moved on. It was over. On day 9, one day before Cassidy was due to come home, I came downstairs early in the morning and found the back door standing open. Not just unlocked, open. The screen door was closed, but the main door, the heavy wooden door that should have been locked, was standing about 6 inches ajar. The morning air was coming in through the gap. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, and I looked at that door, and I did not move for a very long time. The dogs were both sitting at my feet, not alarmed, not growling, but watching the door with me. Remy had his head up and his ears forward. Sister pressed against my leg. The gap between the door and the frame was 6 inches of outside air, 6 inches of the property and the yard and the tree line beyond. I could see a slice of the side yard through it, the grass silver with morning dew, the pale light of early morning, nothing moving. I backed up to the kitchen counter and picked up my phone and called 911. I kept my voice very quiet. I told the dispatcher that I was house sitting on a rural property and had found my back door open this morning, and that I had reason to believe someone might have been accessing a shed on the property recently, and I was alone out here, and I didn't know if someone was in the house. The dispatcher was calm and professional. She asked for the address, which I found in my phone in Cassidy's information shed given me. She said she'd send a deputy, and that they were looking at probably 30 to 40 minutes response time given the rural location. She told me to stay on the line. 30 to 40 minutes is a long time. I held the phone and stood against the kitchen counter and watched the back door and watched the dogs and waited. The dogs did not alert to anything inside the house. Remy went and sniffed the back door, pushing it further open with his nose, and sniffed outside, and then came back and sat near me. If someone had been in the house, I believe Remy would have known it. Working dogs know. They know in ways we don't. The deputy arrived in 32 minutes, which felt both faster and slower than I can describe. He cleared the house, went through every room, the closets, under the beds, the attic access, everything, and found nothing. He went to the outbuilding and confirmed the blanket ID mentioned was gone, which I hadn't checked myself. He walked the property fence and found a section on the west side, near the tree line, where the lower wire had been lifted and re-secured recently. He said, based on how the staples were sitting, someone had been on the property. Someone had been using the outbuilding. Someone had been on Cassidy's 20 acres, and the only question was whether that someone had been accessing the house itself, and the answer to that question was, probably not, but possibly. The deputy was good. He was thorough, and he was honest about what he knew and didn't know. He said it was consistent with a transient. He said there'd been a few reports in the county of someone camping on private property without permission, mostly sheltering in outbuildings. No violence reported. Seemed to be someone in a bad situation, trying to stay out of the elements. He said I'd done the right thing calling. He said he'd request an extra patrol of the road that evening and morning. He filed a report. He did not tell me the person was certainly gone. He didn't know that. Nobody knew that. I called Cassidy and told her everything, the whole story. She was upset but also very focused and calm. She said she was going to see if she could get an earlier flight. That shed had a friend nearer than me who could come and stay the night if not. In the end, her friend Caroline came that afternoon, and we spent the night together, which was both practically and emotionally the right thing. Just having another person in the house changed the quality of the air completely. The dogs were pleased to have 2 more people in the kitchen. We drank wine, and I told her the whole story, and she listened carefully, and we checked all the locks together before bed, and that was almost enough to make the night normal again. Cassidy came home the next morning, and I was overwhelmingly relieved to hand the keys back. Not because I'd failed at anything I hadn't. I'd done everything right. But I was relieved to not be responsible anymore, to not be the one alone on those 20 acres, with the tree line on the west, and the unlocked doors, and the blanket in the shed. The strangest part of that whole experience, looking back, was how invisible the danger was for so long. For 9 days, I was on that property, and for at least part of that time someone was also on that property, in the outbuilding or near it, possibly watching the house, possibly watching me. And I had no idea for the first 6 days. I went on my morning walks. I sat on the porch at sunset. I moved through the property as if I were completely alone on it, which is what I believed. And somewhere in the structure, or the shadow, or the edge of that land, something else was present. That is the thing about space, about those 20 acres, about rural Texas in particular. There is room to hide. There is room for more than one story to be happening at the same time in the same place. You can be living your story, the peaceful one, the coffee on the porch one, the dogs in the field one, and someone else can be living theirs in the same space, invisible to you, and you won't know until a door is found open or a blanket is found moved, and then you understand that the solitude you thought you had was never complete. I think about the nature of witnessing sometimes, about what it means to be watched without knowing it. There is something that changes in you when you understand that your sense of privacy was an illusion, that what you thought was your own interior world, observed by no one, was actually visible. The particular intimacy of your daily routines, the unguarded moments, the things you do only when you think you're alone, all of that, apparently, available. And about the person in the outbuilding. I think about them too, and I try to hold them with some complexity. Because the deputy's theory of a transient in a difficult situation, someone sheltering where they could, that's a real human story. That's not a monster in the shed. That's a person in trouble making desperate choices. The unlocked doors are disturbing, yes, and I don't minimize that. But the human on the other end of those choices was a person in extremity, and the world that puts people in that kind of extremity is worth thinking about too. I can be both genuinely frightened by what happened and compassionate about the person who caused the fear. Fear and compassion are not mutually exclusive. I've learned that. But I'll tell you what I haven't entirely done. I haven't been entirely comfortable staying alone on a rural property since then. I go. I enjoy it. But there's always a moment, usually in the quiet of the first night, when I check all the locks twice and look out at the dark beyond the windows, and remember that the empty dark is not always empty. It just looks that way. There is a stretch of Texas that I think about in the context of the things that have no faces, the experiences that are not about people, not about human danger, but about something else, something older and less knowable. And I am not a person who reaches for supernatural explanations easily. You know that about me by now. I have tried to be fair and honest about every experience I've told you, about what I know and what I don't know, about the rational and the less rational. What I am going to tell you now, I can only tell you in the same way. I don't know what it was. I know what I experienced. I can only do my best to be honest about both. This was 3 years ago, just before I settled in New Braunfels. I was driving back from a camping trip in the Piney Woods region of East Texas, the Sam Houston National Forest area, up near Huntsville and Conroe. I'd been up there for a long weekend, solo camping in a way I love, in the dense pine forest that feels so unlike the rest of Texas, the air wet and loamy and close, the trees overhead shutting out the sky in a way that makes you feel small in a different way than the desert does, not exposed, but enclosed, wrapped. The drive back takes you through the national forest and then down through Montgomery County and then east of Houston, and I had taken a slightly indirect route to avoid the afternoon Houston traffic, which meant I was on smaller roads, county roads, the kind of roads that run through small communities and between fields and that don't appear on the simplified map view of most GPS apps. It was late afternoon, maybe 4 o'clock, and the light was going golden in the way it does in the pine woods of East Texas, slanting through the trees at a low angle and turning everything amber. I had my windows down, and the smell of pine resin and creek water was coming in strong and good, and I was in the particular post-trip state of happiness that comes from a few days in a good place, fed, rested, clean, slightly sunburned, at peace. The road I was on ran through a stretch of national forest land, with no houses, no driveways, nothing for several miles except trees on both sides. I was the only car on the road. The light was long and low. The forest was making the quiet, rustling sound of a late afternoon breeze through millions of pine needles, which is one of the best sounds in the world, and I was enjoying it. Then the sound stopped, not gradually, not fading away as the breeze shifted, all at once. Complete silence, sudden and total, as if a recording had been paused. I noticed it consciously about 3 or 4 seconds after it happened, when my brain processed the absence where sound had been. I turned the radio down, had it very low, and listened. Nothing. No bird calls, which had been present all day. No wind in the trees, though I could see the top branches still moving. No insect noise. No creek sound, even though I knew the creek was right there to my south. Just silence. And then, under the silence, or maybe as a quality of the silence itself, something I can only describe as pressure. A feeling of being in the presence of something very large, not threatening, exactly, but present in the way that a very large thing is present, something that displaces the air around it, something that has weight and mass that you feel before you see it. I slowed the car. I didn't stop entirely. Some instinct kept me moving, but I slowed to about 10 miles an hour, and I looked into the trees on both sides. The afternoon light was coming through at a low angle and making long shadows, and the trunks of the pines went up into a canopy that was dense enough that you couldn't see more than maybe 30 or 40 feet in before the shadows swallowed the detail. I didn't see anything, but I felt something. The feeling was the clearest thing, that sense of largeness, of being observed by something that was categorically different from a person, not an animal in any ordinary sense, something that existed in that forest at a different scale than I did. Something that noticed me in the way that I might notice a small beetle on a rock, not with hostility, not with intent, but with a brief, incidental awareness. I kept driving, slowly. After maybe 30 seconds, the silence broke. It didn't fade back in gradually. The birds returned all at once. The wind came back. The creek sound was there again, like a recording being unpaused. And the feeling, that pressure, that largeness was gone. Just gone. The forest was the forest again. The light was the light again. I was just a person driving on a county road in East Texas. I drove for another 5 miles before I pulled over. I sat in the car with the windows up and the engine running, and I tried to figure out what had just happened. The rational list is long. A sudden stillness caused by a weather shift, some acoustic phenomenon of the forest that I didn't understand, an atmospheric pressure change. An animal large enough to cause other animals and birds to fall silent, a predator moving through the area, a deer or wild hog, even a bear, though black bears are uncommon in that specific part of East Texas. Any of those things. But none of those things explains what I felt, the physical sensation of the presence, the specific quality of being noticed by something enormous and indifferent and old. I am not a mystical person. I am not prone to these kinds of descriptions. I've tried to find another way to talk about it, and I keep coming back to the same words. Large, old, present, indifferent, noticing. I kept that feeling in myself for a long time on the drive home. I didn't tell anyone about it for months. When I finally told it to a friend of mine, a woman named Julia, who grew up in East Texas, whose family had been in the piney woods for generations, she didn't dismiss it. She said the woods out there had things in them. She said the people who had been in those woods the longest knew that. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask her to. I've been back to the piney woods twice since then. The feeling has not recurred. I don't know if that means it was a singular event, a one-time crossing of whatever boundary it was, or if it means I happened to take a different route both times, or if it means nothing at all. But I drive through that stretch of National Forest Road more carefully now than I drive most places. Attentive, listening, keeping the radio off when the forest is on both sides and the afternoon light is at that low amber angle, just in case. Some things are not about danger. Some things are just about the fact that the world is larger and older and less fully mapped than we spend our daily lives believing. And there's a particular feeling that comes with that understanding, not quite fear, not quite awe, something between the two that doesn't have a clean name in English, something the body recognizes before the mind catches up. That feeling and the next thing I want to tell you about share a quality. Both of them live in the category of experiences I don't have clean explanations for, but the next story sits closer to the human world than the piney woods moment did. It involves a person I met in Marfa, and it is, I want to warn you right now, while you're still at the surface of it, the one that has stayed with me the longest, the one that comes to me at the wrong times and makes me need to check that I am still in the world I think I am in. Marfa is a strange town. If you've been there, you know. If you haven't, let me try to explain it. It's a small high desert city in the Trans-Pecos region of West Texas, about 60 miles north of the border, at an elevation of about 400-700 feet, which gives it a quality of air that's different from everything lower, thinner, cleaner, colder at night than you'd expect. It became famous first for the Marfa lights, the unexplained lights that appear at a certain distance from the observation area east of town, moving and appearing and disappearing across the desert without any confirmed source, and then became famous again, more recently for the arts community that has grown up around Donald Judd's enormous art installations in the surrounding landscape. The Chinati Foundation, the particular dry luxury aesthetic of the town that attracts creative people and wealthy travelers. It is a town where old West Texas and contemporary art world and genuine high desert wilderness exist in the same ZIGP code and somehow don't cancel each other out. I went there for the first time 4 years ago, just for a weekend, just to see what everyone talked about. I arrived on a Friday evening, as the sun was going down over the Davis Mountains, and the light was doing what light does in that country, turning the whole landscape into something on the edge of hallucination. I had a room at a small hotel in the center of town, and I walked around in the early evening, had dinner at a restaurant that had good green chili and local beef, sat outside for a while watching the main street do its quiet thing. On Saturday, I went to the Chinati Foundation for their open house, a self-guided tour of the massive aluminum boxes that fill the interior of 2 renovated artillery sheds, 100 pieces in a row, in the large concrete works in the field outside. If you haven't experienced Judd's work in that space, I'll just say that it does something to the way you see space and light and object and time, and that when you come out of those 2 buildings after an hour or 2 inside them, the ordinary world looks slightly different, like it's been reset, like your eyes are somehow new. I was in that particular state, slightly altered, seeing clearly when I walked out of the 2nd artillery shed into the late afternoon and found myself near a woman who was looking at one of the large outdoor concrete works. She was standing very still, the way people stand when they are genuinely absorbed in something, and there was a quality to her stillness that made her look like part of the landscape herself, the grey concrete, the yellow grass, the high blue sky, and this woman in a long dark coat, despite the warmth, completely still. She turned when I came out of the building, not startled, as if she'd heard my footsteps from a distance, and had been waiting, and looked at me. Her face was interesting rather than conventionally pretty, all angles and large dark eyes, and she was probably 50, maybe a little older, with white streaks in dark hair. She said something about the work, the concrete works, something thoughtful and specific that I've since tried to reconstruct and can't quite. We began talking. It was the kind of conversation that happens in a place like Marfa when two people who are thinking are also both present, quick and honest, and going somewhere real faster than most conversations manage. We talked for a while, walking slowly around the outdoor sculptures as the light continued its spectacular work on them. She was from somewhere in Europe, originally. I got the impression of German or Swiss, though her English had almost no accent but had been in Texas for years, she said. She had a particular way of pausing before she spoke, a deliberate quality of choosing her words that I appreciated. She didn't fill silence with noise. She seemed comfortable with silence in a way that takes a certain kind of person. We ended up having dinner together that evening, at the same restaurant where I'd been the previous night, and the conversation deepened. She was careful about certain things. She didn't offer her last name, and when I asked generally what she did, what brought her to Marfa, she smiled and said she came to think. She came to places like this to think. She traveled alone most of the time. She had a house somewhere she returned to, but she preferred to be in motion. She said that she'd found, over the years, that she understood things better when she was in motion. That stillness had a way of letting things accumulate that she found counterproductive. I said something about that being interesting, and she said yes, it was interesting. And the particular way she said it, the tiny pause before and after the word interesting, was the first thing that made me feel slightly sideways. Like she was choosing that word very carefully, as if the alternative words would have said too much. We ordered another round of drinks. The restaurant was mostly empty. The night outside was cold and clear, and the high desert silence was pressing in at the windows. She asked me about myself, and I told her the bare facts where I was from, what I did, and she listened in a way that felt almost professional, not like someone making conversation, like someone cataloging. I noticed this and didn't know quite what to do with it. She was completely pleasant. The conversation was genuinely engaging. Nothing she said was alarming, but there was a watching quality to her that was distinct from ordinary social attention, a sense of data being collected. She said, toward the end of the meal, that she had a question she wanted to ask me, and she wanted me to feel completely free to say no to it. She said she had a property outside of town not far, about 15 miles, that was associated with the Marfa Lights viewing area, in the sense that on certain nights the lights were visible from it, and she was going out that night to observe, and she wondered if I would like to come. She said all the right things. She said she had a truck and she'd drive and bring me back, that it was a beautiful spot, that she'd been going for years and found it deeply restorative. She said she thought I might find it meaningful, given what ID said about the Judd installation and the quality of attention it required. She was very careful, very reasonable, and something in me said no, not loudly, not with any specific justification. Just a quiet, firm no from somewhere deep in the part of me that pays attention to these things. The same part that had been alert in Austin 5 years earlier. The same part that had noticed Karen standing at my kitchen window. I said I was very tired from the drive and the full day of walking, and I thought I was going to call it an early night. I said it warmly. I said it apologetically. I said I hoped the lights were spectacular that evening. She looked at me for a moment, just that brief extra beat, and then smiled and said, of course. Of course. She completely understood. We paid the check and parted in front of the restaurant. She walked in the direction of the main parking area. I walked back to my hotel. I did not look over my shoulder, but I walked quickly. I lay in my hotel room that night and thought carefully about what had happened and what, if anything, I had actually been afraid of. She was an interesting, intelligent woman who had invited me to watch an atmospheric phenomenon from a piece of property outside of town. That was the objective summary of the evening. Nothing had been said that was threatening. Nothing had been done that was wrong. The cataloging quality of her attention, the precise carefulness of her speech, the fact that she'd offered a perfect, reasonable invitation, with all the right reassurances these things were not individually or collectively, evidence of anything. But I thought about the isolation of that property. 15 miles out of Marfa, in the dark, with no cell signal to speak of, in the vehicle of someone I'd met a few hours ago, whose last name I didn't know. And I thought about the particular quality of her invitation, how carefully it had been constructed, how every objection had been pre-answered, how Shed told me I could say no and then watched to see if I would. I stayed in my room. In the morning I got in my car and drove back east toward civilization, and the whole experience settled into the category of things that might have been completely fine, and that ill never know for certain. What I do know is that the part of me that said no has kept me out of enough situations that I've come to trust it completely, even when I can't explain it, even when the situation looks fine on the surface, even when saying no means missing something that might have been perfectly innocent and even wonderful. Because the cost of a false positive saying no to something that was actually safe is that you miss an experience, and the cost of a false negative saying yes to something that was actually dangerous is something I don't need to finish that sentence to communicate. I've gotten better over the years at saying no without explanation, without apology, without the lengthy reassurances that were socialized, especially as women, to provide when we decline something. Just, no thank you. Just, I don't think I will. And then walking away cleanly. That's taken practice. That's taken having enough experiences like the Marfa one to understand that the explanation I owe is to myself, not to the person I am declining. Texas has been a remarkable teacher of that lesson. This enormous state with its enormous landscapes and its enormous darkness in the places between the lit things. I've driven its roads and lived in its cities and walked its trails and sat on its porches at night and watched its skies. And I have been frightened here more than once, in ways that I have tried to be honest with you about. But I have also been held by this place in ways that don't have good words. The way the hill country smells after rain. The way the stars over the Llano Estacado make you feel like the universe remembered you. The way the Gulf Coast goes pink and gold in the morning when the fishing boats are coming in. The way the canyons of Palo Duro in the Panhandle look like a different planet, red and orange and breathtaking. And in the silence down in those canyons you understand something about time and scale and smallness that is not frightening but clarifying. I want to tell you about Palo Duro, actually, because I have one more story from there that belongs in this company of stories, not the daytime Palo Duro, not the state park Palo Duro, with its trails and campground and tourist center, but Palo Duro in October, at night, camping alone in the canyon, with the walls going dark around me, and the cold coming down from the high plains above, and something happening that I don't fully understand, and that I've only told one other person before tonight. It was late October. I drove up from New Braunfels, which is a long drive. The Panhandle is about 8 hours from the hill country, and arrived at the park in the early afternoon. Got my campsite, set up my tent in the canyon bottom, near one of the creek crossings, and spent the rest of the afternoon doing what you do in Palo Duro, hiking the trails, watching the light change on the red rock walls, sitting at the viewpoints, and trying to take in the scale of the place, which is genuinely difficult. The canyon is about 120 miles long and up to 800 feet deep in places, and you keep expecting to round a corner and find it gets smaller, more manageable, and it never does. By evening, the campground was mostly empty. It was the tail end of the season, a weeknight. The weather was cold enough to discourage casual campers. I had a neighbor 2 sites over, a retired couple from Lubbock who went to bed at 8, and that was it. The rest of the campground was dark. I sat at my campsite after dark and ate my dinner and watched the canyon walls. In the dark, lit only by my small camp lantern and the stars, the walls of the canyon were black shapes against a sky that was doing everything millions of stars, the Milky Way again, a setting moon that made the red rock look almost pink before it dropped behind the western rim. The canyon was deeply quiet, not the spooky quiet of a place that feels wrong, but the genuine quiet of a place that is very old and very itself. I went to bed around 9:30 and slept easily, the way I always sleep in cold outdoor air. I woke up at some point in the night, I am not sure exactly when, somewhere between midnight and 3, and lay still in my sleeping bag, aware that something had woken me. Not a sound, an absence of something, the feeling of the air having changed in some way. The canyon was very, very cold. Cold in the particular way of high plains nights in late October, where the temperature drops 25 or 30 degrees from the afternoon high, where the air gets sharp and dry and carries a smell of sage and cold rock. My tent was good, and I was warm enough in my bag, but I was awake and I was aware. I lay there for a few minutes, just listening. The creek nearby, a small trickle at this time of year, made a constant low sound that I'd been hearing for days. The wind in the sparse cottonwoods was there too, a dry whisper. These were the sounds of the canyon at night, familiar and known. And then, from somewhere up the canyon wall, maybe 100 feet up, somewhere on the middle of the red rock face above me, I heard a sound I have never been able to satisfactorily explain. It was rhythmic, not mechanical, nothing uniform or electronic, organic and rhythmic and quiet, just barely above the ambient sound of the creek and the wind. A kind of low, repeated sound, almost like someone slowly pounding something against the rock face, but very lightly, as if something was moving against the wall, and that contact, that rhythm, was incidental. I lay completely still and listened. It went on for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, evenly spaced, slow, continuous, and then it stopped. The canyon was quiet again, just the creek and the wind. I did not sleep again that night. I lay in my bag until the first gray light of morning and thought about what could make that sound on a canyon wall at 2 in the morning. I have considered the following: a large bird roosting on a ledge, moving its wings or feet in some repeated pattern, a rock fracturing slowly and settling, which happens in canyons and produces sounds that can be rhythmic if the conditions are right, an animal, a ringtail, a rock squirrel, something navigating the face in a way that created a regular contact sound, the wind creating a resonance in a specific formation of rock. All of these are possible. None of them quite sits right in my memory. None of them quite matches the quality of what I heard, which had a purposefulness to it that I couldn't entirely explain away. Not human purposefulness, necessarily, but purposeful, like something doing a specific thing for a specific reason, whatever that reason was. In the morning I hiked to the base of the wall above my campsite and looked at the rock face. There was nothing obvious, no nest, no visible animal sign, no section of rock that looked recently fractured, just the canyon wall, old and red and absolute, telling me nothing. I packed my camp and drove back to New Braunfels. I haven't been back to Palo Duro since. I plan to go. I want to see the canyon in spring when the cottonwoods are leafing out and the creek is running higher. I want to sit on the canyon rim at sunset again and watch the light change on the walls. I'm not afraid of that place. I just carry that night with me, that sound in the dark, the way I carry all of these things lightly, but definitely, in the part of my body that keeps records. Here is what I know at the end of all of this. And I mean the end of a very specific kind of journey, not just these stories tonight, but the larger journey of the past decade plus of living in Texas and accumulating the experiences I've told you about and many more that I haven't. Here is what I actually know. I know that the world has edges. You find them in remote places down in canyon bottoms at 2 in the morning, on unpaved roads in parks where the cell signal is gone and the nearest help is 22 miles away, on 2-lane highways at 1 in the morning where the scrubland goes on forever, on both sides, and you are the only light. But you also find them in cities, in the 4 blocks between a late office and a parking garage, in the house next door where someone's light stays on all night, in the back room of a bar where someone asks you a question they shouldn't already know the answer to. The edges are everywhere. That's the thing. I think most of us think that the edges are located in specific places, the dark roads, the remote locations, the obviously dangerous situations. And yes, the edges are there in those places, but they are also in the ordinary world, in the fully lit world, in the world of neighbors and bar conversations and long-planned trips. They live in ordinary moments and reveal themselves without warning. And that revelation, when it comes, changes something in you permanently. I don't mean that in a catastrophic way. I don't mean that every brush with the edges of the world leaves you broken or unable to function or unable to love the ordinary light of ordinary days. What I mean is more like what happens when you learn something true that can't be unlearned. The world is still beautiful. The hill country is still heartbreakingly beautiful. The star fields over West Texas are still extraordinary. The green of the river through New Braunfels on a summer morning is still enough to make you believe in grace. All of that is still real and still good and still worth everything. But you hold it differently now, with slightly more careful hands, with more gratitude, honestly, because you know it's not guaranteed. You know that the beautiful ordinary day has edges it doesn't always show you. You know that the safety you feel is not absolute. And knowing that carrying that specific weight makes you pay attention differently, makes you present in a way that maybe you weren't before. I think about all the people in these stories, the people whose intentions I couldn't read, the woman in the house next door who stood at my kitchen window and watched me go on walks, the man on the West Texas road who stood next to my tire iron, the man who sat on the porch and watched me leave, the woman in Marfa who asked me to drive out into the dark. I don't think all of them were dangerous. I think some of them were. I think some of them were people in their own pain and difficulty who crossed into my life and left traces that I am still reading. And I think one or two of them, if things had been even slightly different, if I'd been slightly less awake, slightly less stubborn in my instincts, slightly more inclined to accommodate social pressure over inner warning, might have been the last people to be in certain stories at all. And that thought is not one I dwell on. It's not useful to dwell on, but I hold it, honestly, as part of what these experiences have taught me. The closeness of things, the way a small decision which route to take home, whether to go along on the night drive, whether to say something to the parking attendant, whether to trust the feeling can be the actual hinge point, the actual place where one version of the future diverges from another. I have been lucky. I want to say that. I want to honor it actually, because luck is real, and it is not evenly distributed, and I know that. Some of what has kept me safe has been instinct and attention, and good judgment, and a little stubbornness, but some of it has also been luck. The parking lot attendant who happened to be in the booth, the spare tire that happened to be properly inflated, the dogs who happened to not alert, the early morning light that happened to let me see the open door clearly before I moved through the house. Luck is not nothing. Luck is not separate from the story. It's part of the story, and pretending otherwise would be a kind of dishonesty. And the things I can't explain, the shape in the Eastwood house doorway, the silence in the piney woods, the rhythmic sound on the Palo Duro Canyon wall, these things I hold in a third category. Not human danger, not luck, but something else. The world's own reminder that it contains more than we've accounted for, that our maps are not complete, that the territory extends beyond the lines we've drawn. I'm not telling you what to make of those things. I don't entirely know what to make of them myself, but am no longer inclined to dismiss them simply because I can't explain them. Dismissing things you can't explain is its own kind of dishonesty, and I have tried, through all of this, to be honest. I am coming to the end of what I have to tell you tonight. Not because there isn't more, there is always more, in a state this size, in a life this long, in a heart that has been paying this kind of attention, but because some things need to be let rest, held without more words added to them, allowed to settle. I want to tell you one last thing, and it's not a story. It's just something I've come to believe. Fear is not the enemy of the good life. I know we're taught that. I know the message we get from every direction is that fearlessness is the virtue, and fear is the weakness, and the goal is to eliminate the fear and live bold and unencumbered. I don't believe that anymore. I think fear is information. I think fear is the body and the instinct and all the accumulated wisdom of a species that has been surviving dangerous things for a very long time. And when it speaks, the right response is not to silence it, but to listen, to ask what it knows, to take it seriously, even when you can't prove it's right. The times I have been safest in my life are not the times I was most fearless. They are the times I was most awake, most present, most willing to trust the small, quiet voice that says something is not right here, even when everything around me looked ordinary and normal and fine. Especially then, especially when everything looked fine. I don't know what you carry from your own nights, from the roads you've driven and the houses you've been in and the people you've sat next to who gave you that feeling, that specific, unmistakable, body-level feeling of something being wrong. I hope you've trusted it when it came. I hope you've given it the respect it earned. I hope you've said no when no was what it told you, and walked away when walking away was the only thing that made sense, and locked your door and sat with the lights on for a while after, and let yourself be a little shaken, because being shaken is what happens when something true has gotten close. The world is beautiful, and it is enormous, and it is mostly safe, but it has edges, and the edges are everywhere, and the best thing I know after all of this is to stay awake enough to see them coming, and when you can't, when they come anyway, out of the dark and the silence and the ordinary space of a Tuesday evening, to trust the part of yourself that knows before you know, that fires before the thought forms, that keeps the record straight even when the mind is trying to talk you out of it. Texas taught me that. This enormous, indifferent, beautiful, strange, vast, heartbreaking state, these roads and canyons and cities and dark stretches of nothing between things, these encounters and silences and moments of sharp, clarifying fear. I wouldn't trade a single one of them, not even the ones that still wake me sometimes in the quiet after 3 a.m. and make me lie still and listen and wait to be sure, not even those. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for listening in the dark. I hope you're warm wherever you are. I hope the night is quiet and the morning comes gently, and you carry nothing from these stories that you didn't choose to carry. And if you feel, somewhere between sleep and waking, that particular kind of attention, that stillness, that listening, that sense of the world being larger and older and less fully known than you thought, don't be afraid of it. That's just you finally paying attention. Sleep well. Some things follow you out of the dark not to harm you, but simply to remind you that the dark was always there, and so were you. Actually, I am not done yet. I said I was coming to an end, and I thought I was. But there are things I left out tonight that I need to say. Things I've been carrying longer than some of the other stories. Things that are harder to talk about, not because they are more frightening in the moment-by-moment way, but because they are more frightening in the slow, deep, bone-level way. The kind of thing you build walls around in your memory, and then find one day that the walls have gotten thin. I need to tell you about the house on Magnolia in Seguin. Seguin is a small city in Guadalupe County, east of San Antonio, about 20 miles from New Braunfels. It's a quiet city, the kind that feels somewhat overlooked. There's a pretty town square, a river, some old neighborhoods with old houses, the kind of place that people drive through on the way to somewhere else and rarely stop to examine. I lived there briefly, about 5 years ago, for 8 months, before the New Braunfels job came through. I rented a house on a street called Magnolia Drive, which is a name that sounds like it should be in a magazine spread. Wide shaded sidewalks, Victorian-era houses, mature trees, and in some ways it was exactly that. But like a lot of old streets in a lot of small Texas cities, the beauty was uneven. Some houses pristine and loved, some houses fighting gravity and time, some in between. Mine was in between. It was a 2-bedroom wood frame house from the 1930s, cream-colored with dark green trim, a covered front porch, a small backyard with a fig tree, and inside, high ceilings, original pine floors, a clawfoot tub in the bathroom, and windows that let in a quality of afternoon light that made the whole interior glow amber and gold, in a way I loved immediately. It had a warmth to it, a lived-in quality that old houses have when they've been full of human life for many decades. I walked through it the first time and felt immediately at home. I moved in on a Saturday in February, one of those specific Texas winter days where the temperature is 62 degrees and the sky is that brilliant flat blue that doesn't feel real, and the dry breeze carries the faint sweetness of cedar from the nearby hills. My furniture fit the rooms perfectly. I put a rug in the living room, books on the shelves in the second bedroom, hung a few prints. By Sunday evening I was sitting on my front porch with a glass of wine watching the street go quiet, and I thought, this is good. This particular moment is good. and I am exactly where I should be. I want to give you the good months first, because they were real. February and March in that house were genuinely peaceful. I had a job at a small marketing firm in San Antonio that I drove to 3 days a week, worked from home the other 2. I walked in the mornings to the river and back, about 40 minutes. I cooked at home most nights. I had a good routine, a good rhythm. The fig tree in the backyard started budding in March, and I watched it with the specific pleasure of someone who has never owned anything that grows. My neighbors, a young couple 2 houses down, an older man directly across the street, were pleasant and quiet, and none of them were Karen. I noticed this with relief. The first thing I noticed in the house was actually not a bad thing, and I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. The first unusual thing about the house was that it felt occupied in a way that was comfortable rather than threatening. There was a warmth in the rooms that went beyond the heating system, a sense of presence that felt almost companionable. I would be sitting at my kitchen table working, and I would have the distinct sense that I was not alone in the house, not in a frightening way, but in the way you feel when you're in a room with someone you like who is reading quietly on the other side of it. A kind of shared silence. I mentioned this to my landlady, Diane, a woman in her 60s, who had inherited the house from her aunt and who lived about 20 minutes away in New Braunfels when she came by in late March to fix a problem with the kitchen faucet. I said it lightly, without weight, just that the house had a good feeling to it, a presence. She looked at me steadily for a moment and said yes, the house had always had that. She said it had been in her family for 40 years, and that her aunt, who had lived there for most of that time, had said the same thing from the very beginning, that it felt accompanied. I thought about that word for a while after Diane left. Accompanied, it was the right word. That was exactly the feeling. In April things began to change. Slowly, so slowly that I didn't recognize the shift until I was well into it. The comfortable sense of company in the house began to take on a slightly different quality. Still not threatening, not quite, but less restful, more watchful. The way a room can feel differently depending on whether the person in it is at ease or not, even if you can't see them. I started sleeping less well. Not insomnia exactly, I'd fall asleep without difficulty, but I would wake at 2 or 3 in the morning, feeling that I'd been woken by something. The same kind of waking I'd experienced in Houston, but without that one single dramatic event to anchor it. Just the repeated waking, just the sense of the house being very awake around me. I started noticing sounds I hadn't noticed before. The floors of old houses speak constantly, they expand and contract, the wood telling the story of temperature change and time. And I knew this. I was not new to old houses, but there was a particular sound that I began to hear in the nights that I hadn't categorized as settling. It was a creak from the second bedroom, the one I used as my office, which I never slept in. A single specific creak, always the same board, always approximately the same time of night, somewhere between 2:30 and 3:30, every night, as consistent as a clock. There is probably a completely rational explanation for that. The thermal cycling of a floorboard that is positioned near a heating vent, expanding as the heat comes on in the night hours, as the temperature drops, producing a predictable creak. I am aware of that explanation. I tried it on for a long time, but the consistency of it, the exact same board, the exact same time window, produced a physical reaction in me that the thermal cycling explanation didn't quite neutralize. I'd be awake, and I'd hear it, and I'd lie very still and wait for the next one. There was never a next one, just that single creak, just once. I started avoiding the second bedroom at night. Silly, I know, it was my office. I had books in there, a printer, papers. I needed to be in that room regularly. During the day I was fine in there. But after about 8 in the evening, I would find excuses not to go in. And if I needed something from there, I'd get it quickly and come back out, not fully registering why. Just feeling better when I was in the kitchen or the living room or my own bedroom with the door closed. I told myself in early May that I needed to address this because it was getting slightly ridiculous. Avoiding a room in my own house because of a floor creak. I went in and sat at my desk at 10 o'clock one evening with my laptop and made myself stay there and work for an hour. Nothing happened. The room was exactly what it always was: my desk, my books, the framed print over the shelf, the window looking onto the side yard. Normal, completely normal. I felt vaguely ashamed of myself and also relieved, and I worked for 90 minutes before I went to bed, and that night I slept through until 6 in the morning without waking. Good. I was done with that. Except I wasn't, because the next night the creak was there again, at 3 in the morning, and I was awake again, and I lay there listening for the second creak that never came. And by 4 in the morning, I had accepted that I had a complicated relationship with that room, and that pretending otherwise wasn't going to resolve it. In late May I had a friend visit, a woman named Priya, who'd been my closest friend since graduate school, who lived in Austin and came to stay for a weekend. Priya is one of those people who is so fundamentally grounded and so oriented toward practical solutions that her presence is like being near ballast. She doesn't overreact to things, she doesn't escalate, she just processes and responds. I love her for it. I told her about the creak on Saturday night over dinner, and she listened without dismissing it and without amplifying it, the way she always does, and she said simply, "Let me hear it." So I moved the inflatable mattress ID, borrowed for her visit, into the second bedroom rather than the living room. I explained the floor creak thing, and she said, "Fine." She'd keep track of when she heard it. She was deeply matter-of-fact about this. She heard it at 2:47 in the morning. She told me so the next morning at breakfast, looking thoughtful. She said it was a single creak, a specific board near the closet, sounded like someone shifting their weight. She paused and said, "It really did sound like someone shifting their weight." She also said, "I am sure it's thermal. Old house, specific board, specific time of night. But it really did sound like someone shifting their weight." Priya left Sunday afternoon, and the house felt different after she left. Quieter in the bad way. The accompanied feeling was back, but it had a quality to it now that was harder to read, not threatening still, but more present, more awake. I want to tell you about the night in June when the feeling reached its clearest point, because it's important to be accurate about what happened, and what I thought, and what I felt. It was a Tuesday night in mid-June. I had worked late, gone to bed around 11, and woken at the usual 3-ish hour to the creak from the second bedroom. Except this time, there were 2 creaks. That was new. In 3 months of this, there had never been 2. I lay still and counted them: 1, then a pause of maybe 10 seconds, then the second. 2 creaks of the same board, and then, after the second creak, a sound from a different part of the room, not the floor. Higher up, the closet door, which I kept closed, made a very specific sound. When it moved, the latch was slightly loose, and the door would drift open an inch or 2 on its own sometimes, and when it did, it made a soft click and drag sound. I knew that sound well. I'd heard it many times in the daylight, when a draft moved through the room. In the dark at 3 in the morning, with 2 floor creaks preceding it, it sounded entirely different. I sat up in my bed. My heart was doing its fear thing, not racing, exactly, but moving up in my chest, becoming loud and present. I looked at my bedroom door, which was closed. The house was completely dark. I could hear the ambient sounds: the window unit in the living room, the distant sound of a truck on the main road nearby, the fig tree moving slightly in the yard. I should get up. I should check. I told myself this clearly and directly. I should get up and go look in the second bedroom and find nothing, and go back to sleep and stop letting a loose closet door and an old floorboard be the source of this ridiculous ongoing fear. I got up. I opened my bedroom door. The hallway was dark. The door to the second bedroom was at the end of the short hallway, about 12 feet away. It was slightly ajar. I generally left it partly open for air circulation, and from the gap I could see the interior darkness of the room, and the faint rectangle of the window on the far wall where the curtain let in the diffuse light of the street outside. I walked down the hallway. My feet on the pine floor were quiet. I reached the door of the second bedroom and pushed it open and reached in and turned on the overhead light. The room was exactly as I had left it. Desk, bookshelves, print on the wall, my office chair slightly turned from where I'd pushed it back when I'd last sat in it. The closet door was open about 3 inches. The floor was still. I stood in the doorway and looked at everything carefully. I checked the closet. I opened it fully and looked in. Nothing there but my stored coats and out-of-season clothes and a box of books I hadn't unpacked. I checked the window, locked. I looked at the floor near the closet, near the board that always creaked. There was nothing. I stood in that lit room for several minutes, and I did not feel relieved. This is the thing I need to be honest about, and it is one of the stranger aspects of this whole experience. I stood in the room with the light on, and everything exactly as it should be, and I did not feel better. The sense of being not alone was, in that moment, stronger than it had been all year. Not threatening, not hostile, but absolutely present, as specific and real as another person's warmth in a room. Something in that room was aware of me, watching me stand in the doorway, seeing me look for it. I turned the light off and went back to bed and lay awake until morning. I started asking about the house. The next time I spoke to Diane, I asked about the history of it, who had lived there before her aunt, how far back she knew. Diane was thoughtful and not evasive, and told me what she knew, which was that the house had been built in the 1930s by a family named Drescher, a German immigrant family that had come to Guadalupe County in the previous generation and done well in the farming community. Several generations of the family had lived in the house. Diane's aunt had bought it from the Drescher family in the 1970s, when the last of them to live there, an elderly woman who had never married, had died, and her distant relatives had decided to sell. The elderly woman had lived alone in the house for the last 20 years of her life. Diane said this last part without emphasis, without suggesting anything by it. She was just giving me the history ID asked for, but I thought about it. A woman who had lived alone in that house for 20 years, who had died there. In what room, I didn't ask. I found I didn't want to know if it was the second bedroom. I lived in the house for 3 more months after that conversation. The months got gradually harder, not in a dramatic way. I was not terrorized. I was not visibly haunted in the Hollywood sense, but the quality of sleep continued to deteriorate, and the sense of company in the house lost whatever remained of its original warmth and became something more simply watchful, more simply there, in a way that I could neither confirm nor deny, and that I could not accommodate and could not dismiss. When the job offer came from New Braunfels in September, I took it immediately, and I was not sad to leave that house, which I had loved in the early months. I was glad to leave it. I moved out on a Saturday morning in October, and I said goodbye to Diane, who hugged me and said she hoped I'd been comfortable there, and I said yes. The house was beautiful. I'd been very comfortable, which was partly true, which was the truest thing I could say, without opening a conversation I didn't have the words for. I've thought about the Drescher woman sometimes, the one who lived alone there for the last 20 years of her life. I think about what it means to spend that long in a place, to love it, or to be unable to leave it. The two things can look very similar from the outside. I think about what mark a life that long leaves on a space, whether the wood and the plaster and the old pine floors absorb something of the person who walked them daily for decades, whether what I felt in that house was really something present, or whether it was the accumulated trace of presence, the memory of someone walking those same halls, making that same creak, opening that same closet door, in the same hours of the same dark nights, for 20 years. Whether there's a difference, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think the honest answer is that I don't have the framework to know. And I've made a kind of peace with that. New Braunfels has been quiet, in the good way. The house I am in now was built in 2002, and has no particular history that anyone has told me, and no creaking floors, and no sense of company, except when I invite it. I sleep well here. The Como River is 4 blocks away, and I walk to it sometimes at dawn when the water is the exact temperature, as the air and the cypress trees are reflected in it perfectly, and the egrets are fishing in the shallows, and the whole world is completely still and real and present in a way that requires no explanation. This is what I come back to, always back to this. The river and the trees and the early morning, the ordinary profound beauty of being alive in a specific place on a specific morning, with the light coming up gold over the limestone hills. I come back to that, and I hold it, and I let it be what it is, which is enough. More than enough. But I carry the other things too. I've told you that. I carry the man on the Maverick Road, and Karen in her house, and the shape in the Houston doorway, and the silence in the piney woods, and the sound in Palo Duro, and the creak on the Magnolia Drive floor at 3 in the morning. I carry the woman in Marfa, and the nights on the 35, and all the moments when the ordinary world showed me its edges. I carry them, and they've made me who I am, which is someone who pays attention, someone who trusts the deep, quiet knowledge in her body before the explanations arrive, someone who has learned that safety is earned by attention and not by bravado, someone who has been afraid and remained standing and kept going and found the morning after each dark night and let that be a kind of victory, however quiet. There's something I want to tell you about fear specifically, the physical mechanics of it, because I think it's important, and I think we talk about fear in ways that miss its real function. We talk about it as if it's an obstacle, as if the goal is to eliminate it, outgrow it, overcome it, as if a person without fear would be a better or braver or more fully alive person. I don't believe that anymore. What I believe is almost the opposite. Fear is the most ancient thing in us. It is older than language, older than thought, older than any of the things we call civilization. It comes from the part of us that has been surviving dangerous environments for as long as humans have existed, for as long as the ancestors of humans existed before that. It is not a failure of sophistication. It is a success of evolution. It is the gift of every generation that survived something terrible, so that the next generation could be born to be afraid of the right things at the right times. When I feel fear, the real kind, the deep body kind, not the movie jump scare kind, I have learned to slow down rather than speed up, to get quieter rather than louder, to let the fear be information rather than trying to silence it, because it knows something. It always knows something. And the times I have been most at risk in my life, the times that could have gone differently, were the times when I tried hardest to talk myself out of what my body was already telling me. The Austin bar, the Maverick Road, the Marfa dinner, the Houston street. Every time, the body knew first. Every time, the mind tried to construct the rational case against it. Every time, the body was right. I trust my body now in a way I didn't at 24. I trust it the way I trust the river. When it's running high after a rain, you don't argue with the river. You respect the river. You give it the deference it's earned. I want to tell you about one more thing before I truly stop. One more thing that I've never told on these nights, but that I want to say once, clearly, so it's been said. About 8 months ago, I was driving home from San Antonio late on a Friday night, just before midnight, on the 35 North. And I was thinking about all of these things, these stories, this specific collection of memories, and I was thinking about what they add up to, what the thread through them is, what the thing is that I've been learning slowly all these years across this enormous state, and the answer came to me quietly, somewhere between Kyle and Buda, in the section of the 35, where the road crests a small hill and the lights of the San Marcos Valley spread out below in the dark, and it was this, that the opposite of fear is not courage. The opposite of fear is not even calm. The opposite of fear, the thing that actually, functionally counters fear in the moment you most need to counter it, is presence. Full, committed, sensory presence in the exact moment you're in. Not the past, not the projected future, not the story you're constructing about what might be happening or what might happen next. Just here, just now, just exactly what is in front of you. When the man stood next to my tire iron on the Maverick Road, the thing that kept me most safe was not being brave. It was being completely present, aware of exactly where his boots were, exactly where my car door was, exactly what my hands were doing, exactly where the light was falling. Presence, not courage, not bravado, not the performance of being unafraid, just being exactly where I was, exactly. And that's not something you practice in comfortable situations. You practice it in the uncomfortable ones. You practice it in the moments when fear is trying to pull you into the future or the past, trying to make you calculate and construct and project, and you keep bringing yourself back to the ground under your feet, back to the air in your lungs, back to the specific real present moment you are actually living. Fear says, This might happen. Present says, here is what is happening, and here is what I can do. That distinction has saved me more than once. I believe that fully, and I wanted to say it here, in this company, in this particular darkness, because it feels like the truest thing I know, and these nights are for the true things. So, it's late now. The night has gone deep around you. I hope you're still comfortable, still warm, still somewhere soft. I hope these stories have kept you company in the way that I've tried to keep you company, not by frightening you for its own sake, but by being honest with you about the world, about the parts of it that don't always get spoken in the light of ordinary days. Texas is going to be here tomorrow, all of it, in all its strangeness and beauty and enormousness. The canyons and the forests and the rivers and the highways, the cities with their particular energies, the small towns with their histories, the wide open spaces where the sky is the most real thing for as far as you can see. It's all going to be there, and you're going to move through it the way we all move through it, trying to be present, trying to trust ourselves, trying to see the edges before we're on them. Yeah, we'll be mostly fine. The world is mostly fine. But now you know, and knowing is different from not knowing. Knowing makes you a little more awake, and being awake is the thing. Be awake, pay attention, trust the part of you that knows before you know. And if you find yourself, some night, on an empty Texas road at 2 a.m, with the stars in their full blazing thousands overhead, and nothing on either side of you but all that beautiful dark, let yourself feel it, the smallness of you in all that space. The bigness of the space around your smallness. That particular feeling is not something to be afraid of. That particular feeling is something to be grateful for. That is the world reminding you that you are alive in it. And being alive in it, for exactly as long as we are, is the whole extraordinary point. I'll see you next time. Stay safe, sleep well, and know that whatever is out there in the dark, it knows you're paying attention now. Wait, don't go yet. I know I said I was done, and I keep saying that, and then finding more. That's what happens when you open the door to these things. They don't come in one tidy parade. They come in their own order, their own time. The ones you push to the back finding their way forward, when the ones in front have finally been spoken. There's a story from Corpus Christi I haven't told you, and I need to tell it because it's one of the ones that shaped me the most deeply, and because it happened slowly enough, and in a place ordinary enough, that I almost didn't recognize it as what it was until it was nearly over. Corpus Christi is a coastal city. It sits on the Gulf, on a bay, and it has the quality of all coastal Texas cities: the salt air, the flatness, the pelicans on the pier posts, the particular way humidity and heat feel when they come off water instead of off land. I was there for a long weekend in early August, about 6 years ago. A friend of mine named Sophie had recently moved there for work, and she'd been asking me to visit for months, and I finally had a free weekend, and I went. Sophie had a 2-bedroom apartment a few blocks from the seawall, and she was good company, the easy kind, the kind where you can be quiet together, as well as loud, where you don't feel obligated to perform. Her neighborhood was pleasant, beach rentals mixed with year-round residents, palm trees, the specific casual shabbiness of a place that accepts sand in the floors as a matter of course. I arrived on a Friday afternoon, and we went to the seawall and walked it as the sun was going down over the bay, the water going pink and gold, the fishing boats coming in, the long flat beauty of the Gulf. We had dinner that night at a seafood place near the marina, the kind of place where the menu is written on a chalkboard, and the catfish is fresh, and the hush puppies are perfect, and we talked for hours, the way you do when you haven't seen a good friend in a while, and there's real things to catch up on, real life things, the kind of conversation that leaves you feeling more known and more solid afterward. The second day was a perfect beach day. We drove over the causeway to North Padre Island, spread our stuff on the beach, swam in the warm Gulf water, lay in the sun. The Gulf of Mexico in August is bath temperature and green-blue and gentle, in a way that the Pacific coast isn't. The waves are small, and the current is mild, and you can float in it and feel held. We were out there for hours. The sun was enormous. The sky was flat and hot blue. I was happy in the pure physical way of being perfectly warm in warm water on a good day. It was the evening of that second day when things changed. We'd come back to Sophie's apartment late in the afternoon, showered off the sand and salt, and Sophie had said she wanted to show me a specific place she'd found since moving here, a little restaurant bar on the edge of the Marina district, locally owned, best frozen margaritas she'd ever had, a patio that looked out over the water. She'd been there a few times, and the owners were friendly, and it had a good energy. We walked there. It was about 20 minutes on foot, and everything about the beginning of the evening was right. The restaurant was exactly as described, small, relaxed, a wooden patio that jutted out over the inlet, strings of lights overhead, the sound of the water below. The margaritas were excellent. The owner, a man named Rawl, came out to say hello when Sophie introduced herself as a regular, and he was warm and funny and talked with us for a few minutes before going back to managing the kitchen. There was one other couple on the patio, a man and woman, who appeared to be in their 50s, sitting at the far end, having a quiet dinner. And at the bar inside, visible through the open patio door, 3 or 4 other patrons. Normal Friday evening crowd for a small place. We settled in. We had another round. We ordered food, shrimp tacos, fresh and simple, and very good. The evening light on the water was extraordinary. I was in that state where everything is hitting correctly, where the warmth and the food and the friend and the view are combining into a kind of low, deep pleasure. I noticed the man at the inside bar in the middle of our second round of food, not because he was doing anything, just because he was looking at us, at the patio, in a consistent and unbroken way that registered at the edge of my awareness. Men look at women in restaurants. This is not news. I registered it and moved on, but he kept looking, not with the ordinary casual glance and look away of someone who is simply in the same space, with the fixed attention of someone who has found a specific thing to look at and is not finished with it. I became more aware of it gradually, the way you become aware of a sound that has been present for a while before you consciously register it. By the time ID consciously registered it, he had been looking for a while. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his late 40s or early 50s, wearing a plain dark t-shirt. His face was heavy and expressionless. He was not drunk, his posture was upright, his movement when he reached for his drink was controlled. He was simply looking at us with a thoroughness that felt less like admiration and more like assessment. I said something to Sophie, quietly, not wanting to make a thing of it. I said, "The guy inside at the bar has been staring at us for a while. Is it just me?" Sophie looked, casually, and then looked back at me and said no. She'd noticed it too. She said it with the tone we use for these situations, the specific flat tone that contains its own frustration. "Yes, I see it. I was hoping not to have to deal with it. I resent that we have to deal with it." We kept eating. We kept talking. I kept the man in my peripheral vision without staring back. About 10 minutes later, he moved. He got up from the bar stool, left his drink on the bar, and came out to the patio. I tracked him without being obvious about it. He didn't sit down at any of the patio tables. He walked to the railing at the edge of the patio, the railing that looked out over the water, and stood there with his back to us, looking at the inlet. Or apparently, looking at the inlet, because the railing had a strip of nautical decoration along its top, a kind of rough mirror-finish metal rail, and in that reflective surface he could see the patio behind him, including us. Sophie had caught this at the same moment I had. She was looking at me. We had a conversation entirely without words. The conversation was, "Yes, you're seeing what I am seeing. Yes, it's what we think it is. Now what do we do with it?" The answer to that question is always complicated when it involves a large stranger in a place where you can't easily leave without walking past him. The patio was surrounded on 3 sides by the railing over the water. The only exit was the door into the restaurant's interior, which was the direction the man was oriented toward in the reflective rail. We were, I registered with precision, in a corner. I did the thing I've gotten better at doing over the years. I assessed without panicking. We were not in immediate danger. We were in a public place with the owner present and a couple at the far end of the patio. The man was standing at the railing 10 feet from us and not approaching. His looking at us in the reflective strip was unsettling, but it was not threatening action. I noted the location of Rawl visible through the interior bar window, talking to someone. I noted the other couple at the far end of the patio still there. engaged in their own dinner. I said to Sophie, quietly and normally, as if we were continuing our conversation, "Let's finish up and go in a minute. I want to look at those dessert options they mentioned." Sophie understood. She nodded. We both kept our voices at normal conversation level and our body language at normal friend on the patio level, and we finished our drinks and flagged our server and got the check. The man at the railing had not moved. He was still standing there, apparently looking at the water, watching us in the rail. When we got up to go inside, I made a deliberate choice to go past the man at the railing rather than giving him a wide berth, because I've found that giving a wide berth communicates to someone like that you're afraid of them, and I don't want that communication to go out. I walked within 3 feet of him. On the way to the door, I looked at him directly as I passed. He turned and looked at me. His eyes were pale gray or light green. I couldn't tell exactly in the marina light, and completely flat. Not angry, not lustful, not threatening in any specific legible way, just flat, like looking at the surface of water and not being able to see the depth below it. He held my gaze for 1 second and then looked away, back toward the inlet, as if I'd never been there. Sophie and I went inside, said goodbye to Rawl, paid our check, and walked out the front of the restaurant onto the street. We walked back to her apartment without talking much. We walked a little faster than our usual pace. When we were safely back inside, with the door locked, Sophie made tea, and we sat on her couch, and she said, "Okay, that was real, right? That wasn't us overreacting." And I said, "No, that was real." We talked about it for a while. About the flatness of his eyes, about the patio railing, about the specific calculation of that position at the railing, which either was or wasn't deliberate, and which, the more we talked about it, felt very deliberately chosen. You don't stand at the single railing strip that happens to have a reflective surface, facing the only people on the patio, and look at them in it for 20 minutes without knowing what you're doing. Or maybe you do. Maybe it's unconscious. Maybe some people don't fully know the things they communicate with their bodies, the particular signal that sustained, studied attention sends, especially when it's large male attention directed at 2 women in a corner of a restaurant patio in the evening. Maybe he didn't know. I can give that version of the story good faith. I can hold the possibility that he was just a guy sitting at a bar who found us attractive and looked in our direction more than he should have, and then came to stand at a rail and wasn't thinking about what it communicated. But Sophie and I both had the same physical response, the same specific assessment of being in a corner with limited exit options and being studied. And that assessment, that feeling, has been right enough times in my life that I give it real respect. We made the right call. We left. The rest of the Corpus Christi weekend was fine. We were cautious that night, which felt slightly frustrating. The evening had been interrupted, and neither of us felt entirely easy going back out. We ended up watching movies in Sophie's apartment and going to bed early. The next morning the beach was wonderful. The tacos from the stand near the pier were wonderful, and the drive home was easy and long and beautiful. But Sophie called me a few weeks later. She said she'd been back to the marina restaurant with a co-worker, a man, and while they were there she'd asked Rawl carefully about the regular at the bar. The big guy, pale eyes, just making conversation. Rawl had gone quiet for a moment, and then said that particular customer had been asked to leave a couple of times for making other patrons uncomfortable, and that he was a regular concern in the area, that some of the other establishments had had similar issues. He didn't elaborate beyond that. Sophie thanked him and didn't push further. I've thought about that a lot. The phrase making other patrons uncomfortable, the phrase similar issues, the language of a situation that has been managed and monitored and that has not yet escalated to something legally actionable, but that has also not been nothing. The space between those two things is where a lot of the most dangerous energy lives. And I was in that space that evening, in a patio corner over the Corpus Christi waterfront, eating good shrimp tacos and watching a man watch us in a reflective rail. I'll tell you one more story from the Gulf Coast before I move on, because the Gulf has its own kind of story to tell, and I think it deserves the telling. Port Aransas is about 40 minutes from Corpus Christi, just across the water on Mustang Island, and it's a different world, smaller, louder, more tourist-focused, the kind of place that swells enormously in spring break season and then goes quiet and local again. I've been there several times over the years, and it's a place I genuinely love, with the particular affection you develop for places that are simultaneously tacky and beautiful, that make no apologies for either quality. The beach there is wide, and the water is warm, and in the off-season, the whole island gets a quiet that is different from anything you find on the mainland. I went there alone in November of 2 years ago, not for any specific reason, just for a few days off, a rental cottage near the beach, a chance to let the ocean be the main thing for a few days. November in Port Aransas is perfect in a way that its summer iteration isn't. The temperature is in the low 70s, the Gulf is still warm, the beach is nearly empty, and the particular light of November on that coast, lower angled, richer, more amber, is something I find specifically beautiful. The rental cottage was a small thing 3 blocks from the beach, part of a little cluster of similar cottages that were clearly in the off-season quiet mode. Only one other appeared to be occupied. From the signs of it, and my neighbor, there was an older man, who I saw once early in the morning carrying fishing gear toward the beach, and who waved and didn't stop, which was ideal. The first 2 days were exactly what I'd come for. Long morning walks on the empty beach, afternoon reading, cooking simple meals in the small cottage kitchen, watching the November storms build on the horizon over the Gulf. They didn't come in, they just built and changed, and sometimes produced spectacular lightning far out over the water at night, visible from my porch. I slept deeply and woke early and felt more like myself with every hour. It was on the 3rd day that I noticed the man walking on the beach. He was far away when I first saw him, a figure down the beach, maybe half a mile, walking in my direction. The beach was otherwise completely empty at that hour, just past 7 in the morning, the light still pale and slanted, the beach combed clean by the night tide. I watched him absently, the way you watch any moving thing in an otherwise still landscape. He walked slowly, not strolling exactly purposefully, but without any apparent destination or urgency, just walking, the way some people walk the beach early, for the exercise or the mediation of it. Nothing unusual. I turned away and looked at the water for a while. The Gulf was quiet that morning, low small waves, the surface glassy further out. I could see a pelican doing its thing about 50 yards offshore, that specific prehistoric ungainliness of a pelican in flight, followed by the sudden precision of the dive. When I looked back at the beach, the man was maybe 200 yards away, walking my way, still that same steady pace. I went back to my walk. I was moving in the direction away from him, walking toward the south end of the beach, and he was coming from the north, so we would likely pass each other at some point. This is a normal thing. People pass each other on the beach. I kept walking. The thing I noticed when he drew close enough for me to get a better look at him was that he was watching me, not glancing and looking away the way you do when you pass someone, watching me. His head was oriented toward me in a fixed way from the time I could see his face until we passed each other, a span of probably 200 yards. We passed with about 10 feet between us. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. I looked ahead. I kept my pace. I felt his gaze on the side of my face and then on my back as I went by. I kept walking for another 50 yards, and then I turned, casually, as if I was turning to look at the water. He had stopped. He was standing on the beach about 60 yards behind me, and he was facing me, just standing there, facing me. I turned back around and resumed walking. I kept walking for another 200 yards, and then I turned again. He was walking again, in my direction, the same slow pace. I was alone on a beach in the early morning in November. There was nobody else within sight in either direction. The beach in front of me ran on for another mile or so before it reached the jetty, and behind me was the 200 yards back to the access point where I'd come down from the street. That was the closer option, the option with the street and the cottages and the occupied by a neighbor presence of ordinary human life. I turned around and walked back the way I'd come, not running, not hurrying in an obvious way, walking with purpose. He was about 150 yards behind me when I turned. I kept my pace. I did not look back again until I reached the beach access. At the beach access, I climbed the wooden steps to the walkway and turned once more and looked back. He had stopped again. He was standing at the waterline, about 100 yards down the beach, watching me. He stayed there, watching, while I crossed the walkway and the street and walked to my cottage. Inside, I locked both doors and stood in the small kitchen and thought about what had just happened. The parameters, alone on a beach at 7 in the morning. A man who had walked toward me and watched me, and when I turned back had continued to follow, and then stopped to watch me leave. Nothing in any of that was illegal. Nothing in any of that was a provable threat. It was just a man on a beach behaving in a way that communicated sustained and specific attention. I texted Sophie, because Sophie is one of the people I text these things to now. I told her what had happened, and she said, "Please don't go back out alone this morning. Go somewhere with other people, or stay in." I said I wasn't planning to go back out. I spent the morning inside, made coffee, read, listened to the sounds of the beach from my porch without going to it. Around noon the beach had other people on it, a few families, some older couples, the usual November quiet crowd, and I went out and walked in the daylight with people around, and it was perfectly ordinary, and I didn't see the man again. But I thought about the geometry of that morning, the way Head timed his approach, the way Head stopped when I turned around. Those two things together, the approach and the stopping when seen, are the behavior of someone who knows they are doing something and is managing it deliberately. Someone who chooses to be that kind of presence when the conditions are right, when there's nobody else around, when you're alone. I cut the trip a day short and drove home on the third night instead of the fourth morning. I'm not proud of that, but I'm also not ashamed of it. Getting to home, to familiar ground, to the place where I know every exit and have neighbors I can name, that felt like the correct response to what ID felt on that beach. It was. Let me tell you about a night in Laredo, because Laredo is a story that sits differently from the others. It's not about a person whose intentions I read. It's about a situation that assembled itself around me so gradually and so completely that by the time I understood what was happening, I was already quite deep inside it. I drove through Laredo. It's on the border, the international crossing point, the largest interior port of entry in the United States, on a trip 5 years ago when I was driving from San Antonio down into Mexico, crossing at the bridge into Nuevo Laredo for a few days of travel on the other side. I had done this kind of cross-border trip before, not often, but I was not a first-timer. I knew the basic rhythms, the crossing, the change in everything, the particular intensity of the border zone that gradually diffuses as you get further south. I had planned to get through Laredo and across the bridge before dark. This is a plan with good intentions that went wrong in the very ordinary way of traffic, and a wrong turn, and a GPS that had opinions about a route through a part of Laredo I did not recognize. And by the time I was in position to approach the bridge, it was 8:30 in the evening and dark. This was still fine, technically. The bridge was lit and functional around the clock, and crossings happened all night. The line was long, always long, at the Laredo bridges, and I joined it and settled in for the wait. The wait stretched. This is normal. I'd been in bridge line traffic before. I had water, I had a book, I had the radio. I was patient. The line moved in fits and starts. 10 feet forward, stop. 5 feet forward, stop. The standard rhythm of a major international crossing. It was somewhere in the middle of the wait. I'd been in line about 40 minutes that I became aware of something that I didn't immediately process as problematic. A man outside the car, near the driver's side window, approaching. Vendors work the bridge lines. This is completely normal. Teenagers and adults sell water, candy, snacks, flowers, small toys, newspapers, walking the long lanes of waiting cars and going from window to window. It is a specific and established microeconomy, and I had interacted with it before without thinking anything of it. This man was not selling anything. He walked up alongside my car at a normal walking pace, and as he came level with my window, he looked in. I noticed the look. It was a quick, comprehensive look, the kind that takes inventory. Then he walked on past. I tracked him in my mirrors. He walked to the car behind me, looked in, walked on. He went down the line of cars this way for another 30 or 40 seconds, and then turned and started walking back in my direction. He was going through the cars, looking into each one, checking specifically which cars had a single occupant. He came back past me. His pace didn't change. He didn't make eye contact this time. He went past and continued up toward the front of the line, doing the same thing. I looked at my doors, locked. I looked at my windows up, all of them. I looked at the car in front of me, a minivan with a family inside, and the car behind me, a pickup truck with 2 men in the front seat. I looked at the bridge line extending ahead of me, maybe 30, 40 cars still before the crossing, the bright lights of the inspection booths visible at the end of the long approach. I had no way to leave the line. This is the specific horror of this type of situation, the one I was not prepared for, even with all the preparation I'd done. I had pulled into a traffic situation that functioned like a trap, high concrete barriers on either side, cars in front and behind, no lateral movement possible. The cars ahead of me were the only exit, and they were 30 minutes away. The man came back past me a 3rd time, and this time he did look at me, briefly, directly, and then he moved on. I called someone. I called my friend Marcus, the Marcus from the Austin bar years earlier, and I told him exactly where I was and what was happening, and I said just stay on the line with me. Marcus, to his enormous credit, did not question or deliberate. He said, I am here. Keep talking to me. I kept talking to him. I described what was around me, the car behind me, the family in front, the lit booths ahead. I kept my voice low and normal. Marcus talked back about what he was doing. He was cooking dinner. He described the recipe. He kept his voice easy and unremarkable. Just a conversation, just 2 friends on the phone. The man did not come back to my window. I watched my mirrors for the entire next 22 minutes until I reached the inspection booth. I told the customs officer, quickly and clearly, what I had observed: the man going through the cars, checking single occupants. The officer nodded, thanked me for reporting it, said it was a known pattern, and they were aware of it, and waved me through. I drove across the bridge and into Mexico, and I pulled over at the first safe place. I found a brightly lit gas station about half a mile past the bridge and sat there with Marcus on the phone for another 10 minutes, until my hands stopped their low-level trembling. I didn't make the Mexico trip that year. I crossed back over the next morning and drove home. Some things you can prepare for, and some things require more information than you had when you made the plan. What stayed with me from Laredo was the trap of it. The way the traffic line is, in its ordinary function, a kind of safe and regulated thing, and how that regulation creates its own vulnerability. The cars locked in place, the single occupants visible through their windows, the long wait that is long enough for someone to work the line, the ordinary made dangerous by the specific way the ordinary creates known patterns that the wrong kind of person can read and exploit. I think about that everywhere now. Not in a paranoid way. I don't walk through the world looking for the trap version of every situation. But I am aware that ordinary structures, traffic lines, parking garages, trails with a single access point have shapes that can be read by the wrong kind of attention. And the awareness of that isn't fear. It's just information. Part of the map. Texas is full of crossings. Border crossings. Literal ones. But also crossings in the other sense. The places where the world you know edges up against the world you don't. Where the familiar path brings you to the edge of something larger and less governed. That's part of what I love about it. Honestly, the state is so large and so varied and so full of edges that it won't let you get entirely comfortable. It keeps reminding you that you're in a real place with real dimensions and real consequences. And there's something true in that, something necessary. I want to tell you about the Trans-Pecos one more time. About MC Donald Observatory on a night in August, a few years before the Big Bend trip, because the Trans-Pecos gave me one of the strangest and most persistently unexplained experiences of my life, and it happened in a place that is, on the surface, one of the most innocent and scientifically oriented places you can visit in Texas. MC Donald Observatory sits on Mount Locke, just west of Fort Davis in the Davis Mountains. It's a working research facility, several large telescopes, operated by the University of Texas, doing actual real scientific work, but it also has a strong public program, star parties, guided tours, a visitor center. I went for one of their famous star parties, which happen several nights a week and are genuinely wonderful. A trained astronomer guides you through the sky. You line up for views through research telescopes. The altitude and the darkness of that location produce a night sky that rivals Big Bend. I'd gone up in the afternoon to do the daytime tour first, and then stay for the star party at 9. The afternoon was pleasant, good exhibits about the history of the observatory and the telescopes, a tour of the dome of one of the smaller scopes, and the view from the mountain top, which on a clear August afternoon in the Davis Mountains is absolutely extraordinary. The mountains rolling away in every direction, the high desert in all its variety, the town of Fort Davis visible in the valley below, like a handful of buildings dropped into a cupped hand of rock. I had dinner at the small restaurant on the site and watched the sun go down from a viewing area, and then at 9 I joined the star party group, about 40 people, families and couples and individual travelers, a good-natured crowd in the cool mountain evening. The star party was everything the reviews had promised. The astronomer was excellent, funny, and precise and generous with explanation, and the line for the telescope view moved steadily, and the sky above us was extraordinary. I was in a state of genuine joy, the way I often am under a properly dark sky, the sense of everything being put in correct proportion. It was in the break between the first and second telescope sessions that I walked away from the main group to stretch my legs. Just a short walk on the paved path that runs around the back of the visitor center and toward the smaller utility buildings. I had a red light flashlight, which is the standard equipment for dark sky viewing. Red light doesn't interfere with your night vision the way white light does, and I was moving slowly, looking up, when I heard something. From the direction of a low concrete outbuilding about 50 yards off the path, a voice, speaking quietly, steadily, without pause, like someone reading something or reciting something, a low monotone that had a rhythmic quality to it. I stopped. I listened. The voice went on, just that low, steady, rhythmic murmuring, too quiet to distinguish words. I told myself, someone on a phone call who stepped away from the group. This is the obvious explanation. This is almost certainly correct. People step away from groups to make phone calls all the time. But the voice was not the right cadence for a phone conversation. A phone conversation has pauses, changes of pitch, the interactive rhythm of speech that is going somewhere and listening for something in return. This voice was uninterrupted. It just went on, like it was not in conversation, but in recitation, like it was doing something that required words spoken in a specific order. I stood on the path with my red flashlight pointed at the ground, and I listened for about a minute, and then the voice stopped completely, and the silence that replaced it had, for just a moment, that particular quality I'd felt in the piney woods, that sense of something large and present. It was very brief, a few seconds at most, and then it was gone, and the night was just the night, the stars overhead and the distant sounds of the star party group and the cool Davis Mountains air. I went back to the group. I didn't tell anyone what I'd heard. I went through the second telescope session and looked at Saturn's rings from a mountaintop in West Texas and let the beauty of that specific view clear everything else out of my head, at least for a while. I've never found an explanation for what I heard from that outbuilding. A staff member doing something routine that I misread in the dark. Someone from the group who'd wandered off and was reciting something for their own private reasons. Something the wind and the specific acoustics of the mountain made out of a mundane sound source. All possible, all reasonable. None of them quite eliminating the specific quality of that voice, the specific rhythm of something being said that was not part of a conversation, in the dark behind a building on a mountaintop in West Texas at 10 in the evening. I've been back to MC Donald Observatory since. The star parties are worth it every time. But I stay on the lit paths now. The Davis Mountains, actually, have one more story in them for me. And this one is the most recent of everything I am telling you tonight. It happened last spring. I went out to the Fort Davis area for a 4-day solo trip, hiking and camping, using a small bed and breakfast in Fort Davis as my base. The bed and breakfast was run by a couple in their 60s, John and Marilyn, who had the particular warmth of people who have been in the hospitality business long enough to genuinely love it, who remember their guests' names and coffee preferences and recommend hikes with the specific passion of people who actually walk them regularly. On my third day, I did a hike I'd been saving a longer route into the Olympia Canyon area, about 12 miles round trip, through some of the most spectacular terrain in the Davis Mountains. Rocky trails, the canyon walls striped with pale limestone and dark volcanic rock, the creek running clear in the canyon bottom in a way that sounds impossible for desert Texas, but is real. I'd done similar hikes before. I was well prepared, and the first 7 miles were everything I'd hoped for. It was on the return portion, about 4 miles from the trailhead, that I came around a switchback on the canyon wall and found someone coming the other way. A woman, somewhere in her 30s, hiking alone, which was not unusual. She looked trail-appropriate, good boots, pack, water. She said hello when she saw me, and I said hello, and we did the standard hiker exchange as we passed. The quick conversation that hikers have when they meet on a trail. Where did you come from? How was it up there? How much further to the water source? Normal and good. The specific courtesy of people in a remote place who both know they might need each other before the day is out. She asked how far I'd come, and I told her, and she asked if I'd seen anyone else on the trail today, and I said no, just the two of us, as far as I could tell. She said she hadn't either, and then she said, "There's a man on the upper section of this trail, past the second water crossing on the north-facing slope. He was sitting off trail when I went by, and he looked at me in a way I didn't like. I don't know if it means anything, but I wanted to say it." She said it clearly and factually, without drama. The way You'd report a trail condition: slippery rock near the waterfall, loose section on the south slope, just information. She was not trying to alarm me. She was reporting what she'd seen and leaving me to assess. I thanked her, and I meant it. I genuinely deeply thanked her, because that is the act, that specific act of one woman telling another woman what she'd noticed, that matters enormously. It costs something to say it. You can feel silly. You can feel like you're causing alarm unnecessarily. You can talk yourself out of it. She didn't. She said it. I had about 4 miles between me and the trailhead, and the man she'd described was 2 or 3 of those miles back, where I'd come from. I was ahead of him. If I kept a reasonable pace, I would get to the trailhead before he did, assuming he was still sitting and not actively following, which there was no reason to assume. I kept my pace at the upper edge of my comfortable range for the remaining 4 miles. I paid attention to every sound behind me. I encountered no one. I reached the trailhead without incident. I sat in my car for a minute when I got there, just letting the relief be present. And then I called Marilyn at the bed and breakfast and told her what the woman on the trail had said, in case it was useful to know for other guests hiking that route. Marilyn said she'd pass it to the ranger station. She sounded unsurprised. She said the canyon trails occasionally had issues with people who came in from the back roads, who weren't using the main trailhead, who were out there for reasons that weren't hiking. That night at dinner, John and Marilyn's breakfasts and dinners were included in the rate and were excellent, simple home cooking that I looked forward to all day. There were 2 other guests, a retired teacher from Houston and a botanist from El Paso who was studying endemic plant species in the Davis Mountains. The 4 of us had dinner together and talked about the hiking and the weather and the extraordinary star situation out here in the mountains. And at one point, the botanist mentioned having seen an unfamiliar car parked off a back road that afternoon, which he'd found worth noting in a place this remote. We all nodded. We all understood what was not being said. We all lived in Texas, and we all knew what the back roads can be. That dinner, that ordinary, warm, excellent dinner in a small bed and breakfast in the Davis Mountains, was in some ways the most comforting thing I experienced in the middle of a day that had produced its own particular kind of fear. The warmth of other people who are paying attention and sharing what they know, the specific comfort of not being alone in your awareness of the world, community of attention. That's what I've been building slowly over all these years and all these stories. The network of people who tell each other what they've noticed. The woman on the Olympia Canyon Trail. Marcus, who stayed on the phone for 22 minutes in a Laredo bridge line. Sophie, who asked Raul about the man at the bar. Julia, who said the words your body already knew. Priya who slept in the room with the creaking floor and confirmed what ID heard and took it seriously. The people who don't dismiss. The people who say I see it too, and I don't know what it means, and that's enough to say it. The people who trust each other's instincts as much as their own. They are not always easy to find, but when you find them, they are everything. I have been building that network my whole adult life in this state, and every time I've needed it, it has been there. Texas will keep giving me stories. I accept this. I've accepted the terms of living in a place this large, this varied, this full of edges and distances and dark stretches between the lit things. I accept the terms and I find them, ultimately, worth it. The stories and the land and the beauty and the river and the skies are all part of the same bargain. You get the extraordinary views, you get the extraordinary nights, and you get the things that come out of the dark sometimes. You get the complicated human interactions and the unsettling presences and the moments when the world shows you that it's bigger than you thought. You carry all of it, and the carrying, done right, makes you more fully awake in the living of it. I've been talking to you for a long time tonight, and you've stayed, and I appreciate that more than I can easily say. There's a trust in that staying in the dark with someone while they tell you difficult things. It matters. It's real. So let me give you the night back. Let me let you settle fully into the warmth and the quiet and whatever comes next for you, whether that's sleep or the soft drift toward it, or just a few more minutes of the particular stillness that these stories create when they've been told. The world tomorrow will be the ordinary world again. The daylight version, with its reliable light and its comprehensible distances and its social structures that keep most things in their place. Y'all make coffee. Y'all do the things you do. The day will be what it is, and most of it will be fine, genuinely fine, in the way that most of life genuinely is. But y'all will also be slightly more awake in it, slightly more present, and that slight extra aliveness, that particular quality of attention, that's the gift of a night like this, if there's a gift in it. Not fear, not the idea that everything is dangerous, but the knowledge that everything is real, that the world is real and has weight and depth and edges, and that you walking through it are real too, that your instincts are real, that the quiet voice in the body that says something is wrong is real and deserves your respect. Carry that with you. Carry it lightly, the way you carry the things that have made you better at being alive, not as a burden, as a tool, as the most reliable compass you own. And remember that somewhere in the enormous, complicated, beautiful, frightening, true space of Texas tonight, under these same dark skies and these same brilliant stars, someone else is paying attention too. Someone else is in their car, on a long road with the radio on, and the mirrors checked, and their hand near their phone. Someone else is in an old house listening to the floorboards and deciding what they mean. Someone else is on a hiking trail noting what they've seen and telling the next person they meet. Someone else is being awake on your behalf while you sleep. We do this for each other. We always have. It's how any of us make it through. Good night. Sleep well. The dark outside your window has been there since before your grandparents were born, and it will be there long after everything you know is gone, and it has never once stopped the sun from rising. There is one more story. I keep finding one more story. Maybe that's because these things don't have clean endings. They keep living forward into the present. They keep producing new chapters, new discoveries, new moments when a past fear reaches through time and makes itself current again. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe I just have more to say. Texas has given me more than one lifetime's worth of the specific kind of experience these nights are for, and even after everything I've told you, there are corners of it I haven't shown you. The one I want to tell you now happened over several weeks, not a single night, and it's the one that is hardest to talk about because it involves not an encounter or an experience, but a slow realization, the kind that assembles itself from small pieces across time until one day you look at what you've gathered and understand that you've been living inside something much larger and more concerning than any individual piece suggested. This was in San Antonio, about 4 years ago. I had been living in a small apartment in the King William neighborhood for about a year, a historic district of elegant old houses, well-maintained streets, The kind of neighborhood that in San Antonio carries a specific prestige and calm. My apartment was on the second floor of a converted Victorian, one of 2 units in the building, and my downstairs neighbor was a man named Thomas, who was quiet and polite, and left early in the morning for what I gathered was a demanding job in finance or tech, and came home late, and kept the music down and the apartment clean, and was generally the ideal neighbor in every observable respect. I want to be honest from the beginning about Thomas. I want you to understand that everything I observed about him for the first 8 months was genuinely and completely fine. He was considerate. He was pleasant on the few occasions we spoke. He held the building's front door for me and I for him. He accepted packages I signed for when he was gone, and left a note in my mailbox to let me know. Normal. Good even. I was grateful to have a decent downstairs neighbor. The first thing I noticed, and I want to be careful about the word first, because what I mean is, the first thing I noticed as a component of something, which I didn't know at the time, was that Thomas seemed to know things about my schedule that I hadn't told him. This started manifesting in small ways. He would hold the door as I was coming in just at the exact moment I was arriving, as if he'd known I was about to come through it. He would mention something about my habits. "Oh, you were up late last night. I heard your floor," or "I saw you coming in from a run this morning early." Good for you in a way that was pleasant and conversational, and that I took at face value as the normal observations of a nearby neighbor who was reasonably aware of movement and sound in a shared building. But as the weeks went on, the observations accumulated. He mentioned a specific restaurant I'd been to. I hadn't told him, but he said he'd seen my car parked near there on Tuesday, which was accurate. He mentioned that he'd noticed I'd had a friend over on the weekend, also accurate. Priya had visited. He mentioned the time I'd gotten home from a long drive, the previous Friday, accurate, within 20 minutes of when I'd actually arrived. I processed these individually for months, each one innocent. His parking spot gave him a view of the building entrance. He might have heard Priya's voice from his apartment. He might have been arriving home around the same time I did on Friday. Each piece was explainable. Each piece was fine. And then something happened that recontextualized all of it at once. I was looking for a charger I'd misplaced, and in the process of searching was looking at my apartment from angles I didn't usually use, crouching down, looking under furniture, looking behind things. I was behind my sofa, reaching for something I thought I heard sliding back there, when I found something else instead. A small object, circular, about the size of a quarter, black, attached with an adhesive strip to the back of the baseboard near the floor. I crouched there for a long moment and looked at it. I did not touch it. I looked at it the way you look at something. Your brain is refusing to accept looking, and then looking again, trying to find the version of this thing that is benign, that is some normal household object I'd forgotten I'd placed, or that had come with the apartment. It was not that. I have seen enough security and surveillance content in my professional life to recognize, with reasonable certainty, a small audio capture device, not something commercial, not a Google Home or an Echo, something smaller, less obvious, designed to be less visible, designed to be behind a sofa near the baseboard. I stood up. I did not touch it. I walked to my kitchen and stood there for a long time, breathing carefully. I thought about the exits of the building. I thought about my car. I thought about Thomas in his apartment below me, quiet and considerate, knowing things he shouldn't have known. I called the non-emergency police line, and I told them exactly what I'd found and what I suspected. A female officer came to my apartment within the hour. She was efficient and non-dismissive, which I appreciated enormously. She photographed the device in place and then removed it carefully. She confirmed that it was consistent with an audio monitoring device. She couldn't be definitive on the spot, but it was clearly not a household item. She asked me about my neighbors. I told her about Thomas. I told her the list of specific things he'd known, the observations that had seemed individually innocuous, but that assembled into a pattern. She listened and wrote things down, and told me not to confront Thomas directly, and to stay alert to anything else that seemed like it didn't belong. I found 2 more devices over the next few days, one near the window in the kitchen, One in the bathroom, which is the one that made me feel the most violated, the most physically sick in the immediate moment of finding it. Not because of the nature of the device, it appeared to be audio only, but because of what it said about how thoroughly and deliberately I had been watched. The bathroom, the place in a home where you are most entirely private, most entirely yourself, most entirely unguarded. The investigation took several months, and I am going to spare you the full procedural detail of it, because the details were often confusing and frustrating, and the outcome was not as clean or as satisfying as I needed it to be. What I can tell you is, Thomas was questioned. The devices were confirmed as monitoring equipment. The police were not able to definitively prove who had placed them, which is one of those legal realities that makes you feel like the world has failed its one basic job. Thomas moved out of the building a month after the investigation began, which felt like information of a kind. I moved out the following month. I could not stay in that apartment. The knowledge of what had been in it, the knowledge of the months during which my daily life had been recorded, had permanently altered the character of the space for me. There was no way to unknow it. I moved into my current place, in New Braunfels, 2 months later. Before I moved a single item of furniture in, I went through every room, every baseboard, every wall space, every corner, every fixture. My friend Marcus, who has a practical instinct for these things, came and helped me. We found nothing. The apartment was clean. I've done this in every place I've lived since. Before I put anything away, before I make any space mine, I look carefully at everything. It takes about an hour, usually. It's not a paranoid ritual. I don't do it every day. I don't carry a scanner. I don't tear walls apart. Just a careful initial inspection. The kind of attention that costs an hour once and buys a year of some measure of peace. What the Thomas situation taught me, or rather, what it added to everything the other experiences had been teaching me, was about the specific violence of being watched without your knowledge. Not physical violence, a different kind. The kind that violates the interior spaces where you are most yourself, where you believe yourself to be unseen and therefore free to be completely real. There is something in that specific violation that changes you. It made me more private in some ways and less private in others, paradoxically. More careful about my physical space and its security, and more willing to say difficult things openly. Because the idea that privacy might be an illusion makes the performance of privacy feel slightly absurd. And it made me even more grateful, more fiercely, actively grateful for the people who are trustworthy, who are exactly what they appear to be, who don't have other accounts running behind the main one. The people around whom you can be completely real, because you know they are watching you in the only acceptable way, with affection, with genuine interest in your well-being, with eyes that see you as a person and not as information to be gathered. I have those people. I've told you about some of them tonight. Priya, Marcus, Sophie, Julia, Delia, the woman on the Olympia Canyon Trail, who I will never see again, but who I think about with deep gratitude. Marilyn at the bed and breakfast, who passed my information to the ranger station without a second thought. They are the other side of every difficult story I've told tonight, the dark things and the good things held together. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about what it means to carry all of this without becoming someone who is primarily afraid, because that would be the wrong outcome. That would be the thing that the difficult experiences were trying to make me into, and I refuse it. I refuse the closed-off version, the never go anywhere alone version, the treat every new person as a threat version. That's not the lesson. That's the overcorrection. The lesson, the actual lesson, as best I can articulate it, after years of these experiences, is something more like calibrated openness, staying genuinely open to the world, and to people, and to new places, and dark roads, and remote trails, and border towns, and old houses, and all the rest of it, while also staying genuinely awake, bringing both things, openness and wakefulness, trust and attention, love of the world and clear eyes about what the world contains. That combination is harder than either extreme. It's harder than fearless openness and harder than protective closure, but it's the one that actually lets you live, the one that lets you go to Palo Duro and feel what the canyon feels like at night, the one that lets you walk into a restaurant in Corpus Christi on a Friday evening and order the shrimp tacos and let the marina light be beautiful. The one that lets you drive the empty roads at 2 in the morning with the stars overhead and feel small in the good way. The one that lets you be in the world fully, with all its beauty and all its danger, both present and acknowledged. That's the only version of living I am interested in anymore. The full version, eyes open. I hope Texas gives you your own stories. I hope Thea, mostly the good kind. The kind where the road stretches out beautiful and long and empty ahead of you, and the radio finds the right song, and the stars do the thing they do out here, where there's real dark. I hope you get the Big Bend sky and the Guadalupe Mountains at sunset, and the cypress trees along the Frio River, and the hawks riding the thermal updrafts over the Balcones escarpment, and all the rest of the 1,000 things this state does that have nothing to do with fear and everything to do with grace. And I hope that when the other kind of story starts, you feel it in your body before your mind catches up. And I hope you trust it, and I hope you act on it, and I hope you get home safe and sit with all the lights on for a while afterward and let yourself have whatever feeling is true, because the feeling is true. It's always been true. Even when you couldn't prove it, even when it was inconvenient, even when you wished it wasn't there, it was true. Trust it like it's the oldest and most reliable thing you own, because it is. All right, that really is everything tonight. That's the full inventory. I am glad I told you. I am glad you stayed. Tomorrow will be ordinary and good and mostly safe. Tomorrow you'll move through Texas or wherever you are with all your regular competence and your regular life, and most of it will ask nothing of you except to be present in it. Take that seriously. Being present is not a small thing. It's the entire thing. And if you feel, somewhere deep and quiet and body level, that something is not quite right, you know what to do now. You've always known. You just have more company in the knowing. Sleep now. Let the dark be just the dark for a few hours. Let your body rest. You've been paying attention all day, and you've earned the rest. The stories will be here when you wake up. And so, somewhere out there in all that enormous Texas dark, will I be, still paying attention, still taking notes, still trying to tell the truth about what the world is like when you're really looking at it. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. And remember, the lights of the next city are always somewhere ahead on the horizon, rising out of the dark like a slow orange bloom, and getting to them is one of the oldest and most reliable pleasures in the world, and you are going to get there. Close your eyes. The road is long, but the night is not forever, and somewhere beyond the last stretch of empty dark, the morning is already beginning. I keep thinking about one more thing. I know I've said goodbye twice already, and I keep finding more, but this is the nature of these nights. The thing you thought you were done saying turns out to have another layer to it. One more story lives in the space between the ones I've already told, and it deserves its own telling, because it is the one that was the most gradual and the most complete, and the most like a piece of very slow music that you don't realize has been playing until it reaches its final note. This happened in the hill country, in Kerrville, to be specific, which is a small city on the Guadalupe River in Kerr County, about 60 miles northwest of San Antonio. Kerrville has a quality that many hill country towns have, that particular combination of cedar-covered hills, clear river, old limestone architecture, and the specific light of that elevation, and that part of the world that makes everything look like it's been lightly gilded. It's a place people retire to, a place people drive to on weekends, a place that does not feel urgent in the way of cities. It feels settled. It feels as if it has been there for a very long time and plans to stay. I was there for a long weekend about 3 years ago, staying in a vacation rental on the edge of town, a small stone cottage set back from a quiet road with the river audible from the back porch. I was there partly for rest and partly because I was finishing a freelance writing project and needed a few days away from my regular environment to give it the space and silence it needed. The cottage was perfect for this. A wooden writing desk in the front room, good light, a porch that faced the cedar hills, and that river sound in the background that is one of the most consistently calming. The first day I worked all morning and then took the afternoon off and walked into the town center. which is a pleasant walk, old pecan trees and houses that have the slow, comfortable look of places that have been loved for decades. And I wandered the shops and ate a late lunch at a diner near the river and sat on a bench in the little park and watched the Guadalupe go by, clear and green and unhurried, the way the Guadalupe always is in this stretch. I noticed an older man sitting at the far end of the same bench I was on. He had arrived some time after I sat down. I hadn't noticed exactly when, and he was looking at the river, the same way I was. White hair, a weathered face, dressed neatly in a way that suggested someone who took some pride in their appearance. He had a paper bag on the bench beside him, and he was eating something from it slowly, watching the water. We sat there for a while without speaking, which is normal and comfortable two people at a river, sharing a bench and the view, no obligation to perform conversation. It was a good few minutes of just being in a pleasant place. Then he said something without looking at me, said it to the river, almost the way very comfortable older people sometimes talk, without the self-consciousness of having an audience. He said something about the river level, about how it was lower than it used to be this time of year, about how things were different than when he was young. I said something mild in response, that the drought had been hard on the rivers this past year. He nodded and said yes, that was true, and there was something in the weight of it that was not just about drought. We talked for about 15 minutes, in that easy, intermittent way, about the river and the town and the hills and the way the light changed on the cedar in late afternoon. He didn't ask anything personal, not my name, not where I was from, not why I was there. He talked about the specific place the way someone talks about a place they've known their whole life, with a familiarity that is too deep for explanation. He mentioned a flood in 1987 that had changed the river channel here. He mentioned a tree that used to stand at the far bank, a particular cypress, that was gone now. He mentioned that on certain winter mornings, the river mist came up in a way that made the park look like something from a dream. I listened to him with genuine pleasure. There is a specific kind of person who carries the living memory of a place, who is connected to its history in the personal and immediate way of having been present for it, and talking to such a person is one of the gifts of going somewhere and staying still enough to find them. When I stood up to leave, he did look at me then. He looked at me in the way of someone who has been watching the world for a very long time and sees things at a particular depth. He said, "You be careful tonight." He said it quietly, without drama. I said something like I would, of course, and he nodded and looked back at the river. I walked back to the cottage in the late afternoon, that gold amber hill country light doing its thing, and I thought about the old man and what Head meant by that. "You be careful tonight," said to a stranger sitting at a bench, could mean nothing could be the thing an older man says to a young woman alone in a town he knows. A habit of protectiveness or worry with no specific referent. Could be a reflex, could be entirely general. But the specific way Head said it, and the specific moment Head said it when I stood to leave, as if Head been deciding whether to say it and had decided yes, those things stayed with me. I made dinner at the cottage that evening and worked on my writing project for another hour, and by 10 o'clock I was winding down, getting ready for bed. The cottage was quiet and warm, and the river sound was constant through the back porch screen, and everything was exactly what I'd come for. I went to the front window to close the curtains before going to bed, a habit I have everywhere, always, after the King William apartment situation, and as I reached for the curtain I saw headlights at the end of the road, a car moving slowly, slowly enough that I noticed the pace of it, not the normal pace of someone navigating a dark road. The pace of someone who was looking at something. A car moving slowly down a quiet residential road at 10:15 at night, in the way of someone who was reading addresses or watching houses. I closed the curtains. I stood back from the window. I listened. The headlights moved off. I could see the wash of light at the edge of the curtain as the car passed the cottage and continued up the road. I heard it stop somewhere further up, maybe 100 yards away, and idled for a moment. Then the engine cut. I heard a car door. Then silence. I stood in the cottage's front room with all the lights on, which in retrospect was probably not my best decision. A lit cottage on an otherwise dark road is very visible, but turning them off felt somehow worse, felt like hiding in the dark in a way that didn't suit me. I checked my phone. I had signal, which I was relieved about. I had Marilyn's number from Fort Davis still in my phone from the Davis Mountains trip, and I had a general instinct to have a number ready. I heard nothing outside for several minutes. The river continued its sound. An owl somewhere in the Cedars ID heard it the previous night too, did its soft two-note call. The absolute quiet of a small hill country town at 10 in the evening settled over everything. No movement, no further sound of the car. I sat down in the chair at the writing desk with my phone, and I waited. I'm not sure what I was waiting for the sound of the car starting again, for footsteps, for nothing, which would be the best outcome. Just waiting, in the particular alertness that is not panic, but is not rest either, the state of the body holding itself ready. After about 15 minutes, I heard the car start again. The headlights moved past the cottage. I could see the wash through the curtain going back the way it had come. The sound of the engine diminished and then disappeared. Silence. I waited another 10 minutes, and then I did a very deliberate, very careful walk through the cottage, checked all the windows and the door locks, looked at the back porch, through the screen door, without going out onto it. Everything was secure. There was no sign of anyone outside. The Cedar Hills were dark and still, and the river sounded exactly as it always did. I went to bed. I left the light on in the front room. I slept lightly, waking once or twice, and by morning the whole thing had the quality of something my tired brain might have magnified from nothing, except for the old man at the river. "You be careful tonight," said when I stood to leave, said as if he knew something that he couldn't quite explain, or that wasn't his to explain, but that felt necessary to acknowledge. I thought about that in the morning, over coffee on the porch, with the Cedar Hills green and gold in the early light, and the river going by, and the mockingbirds making their inventory of songs in the nearby oak. I thought about the particular knowledge of a person who has been in a place long enough to know its patterns, including the patterns that don't belong. Someone who had sat at that bench enough times to know what was ordinary and what was not, who had noticed something, or heard something, or felt the particular something that long residence in a specific place gives you the sense of your own territory and what moves through it. I drove into town that morning, and the old man was not at the bench, which I'd half expected. I didn't see him the rest of the weekend. I left Sunday afternoon and drove back to New Braunfels with the windows down and the radio on and the hill country doing its late afternoon gold light thing all the way home. I have never found out what the car was about. Maybe nothing. Maybe someone lost on an unfamiliar road who stopped to check their GPS. Maybe someone looking for a specific address and not finding it. Maybe the coincidence of the old man's warning and the slow car was exactly that, a coincidence. One of the thousands the brain makes meaningful when it's in a particular state of attention. But I sat in the front room for 15 minutes that night, listening to the silence, and I have thought about that old man's face when he looked at me as I was leaving, and I believe I can't prove it, but I believe that he knew something and tried to tell me as much of it as he could. That in the economy of information available to someone in his specific position, a person of that place, with that history, with whatever it was he noticed, he gave me what he had. And what he had was 3 words: be careful tonight. And I was. And I got through the night and drove home in the hill country afternoon light. And that's how it ended. That's how most of them end. Not with the thing you feared. With the thing you feared not quite arriving. With you on the other side of the night that had some particular shape to it, some particular quality of danger that you felt without it fully manifesting. Most of the time that's how it goes. Most of the time the fear is information that you act on, and the acting on is sufficient, and you get home, and you sit for a while, and you let your body release what it held, and then slowly, over the following days, the ordinary world reasserts itself, and the specific fear becomes a memory, and the memory becomes a story, and sometimes you tell the story to people you trust, in the right kind of dark, when the hour is late, and the quiet is good, and there's something about the shared attention that makes it possible to say the difficult things clearly, and have them land with the weight they deserve. That's what these nights are. That's what this is. And it matters, I think. The telling matters. Not because telling makes the fear go away, it doesn't, exactly, but because telling makes it known, makes it witnessed, takes it from the private interior where it would otherwise just circle and press and diminish you slowly, and brings it out into the shared air where it can be what it is, which is true, and where it can be received by someone who is genuinely listening. You've been genuinely listening tonight. I feel that, and am grateful for it in a way that is harder to articulate than any of the stories I've told you, because it's not about fear. It's about the other thing, the opposite of the aloneness, that all these experiences, at their worst, produced in me. The sense of not being alone in the knowing, the specific warmth of that. So one more time, from the bottom of the long, strange night we've been through together, thank you for being here, for staying, for listening to the difficult things without looking away. The world is real, and it is large, and it has edges, and it is also, in the right company, at the right hour, something that can be held together with open and honest hands, something that can be examined and felt and witnessed and shared without being reduced or dismissed, something that is worth all of it, all the fear, all the wariness, all the midnight alertness, and the locked doors, and the checked mirrors, and the trusting of the body's oldest knowledge, worth all of it, every single time. The Texas sky does not get smaller, no matter how many times you look at it. The stars do not get fewer, the river does not stop. The cedar hills in the evening light keep being exactly what they are, golden and real and enormous and right there, every time. Hold on to that. Let it anchor you through whatever darkness comes. And know that somewhere in the long reaches of this incomprehensible state, in the canyon bottoms, and on the coast roads, and in the mountain towns, and on the quiet hill country rivers, the ordinary extraordinary world is going about its business in the dark, paying no particular attention to the small human fear that moves through it like a signal. The world is older than your fear, and it keeps going, and so do you. Good night. The dark is patient, but the light is always already on its way. There are things I've been circling around all night without quite saying directly. Things that sit at the center of all of this, under all the specific stories, under all the particular nights and roads and people and places. I want to try to say them now, at the bottom of the night, when the defenses are down and the distance between what you mean and what you say is at its smallest. The first is about loneliness, about the specific loneliness that fear produces. There is the ordinary loneliness of being alone, which can be comfortable and even chosen, and which I have often experienced as freedom. And then there is the loneliness of being afraid and alone, which is something entirely different. The loneliness of being afraid and alone does not have any freedom in it at all. It has instead a quality of profound exposure, of being a small thing in a large world, with nowhere to go and no one to tell. That loneliness is one of the most complete feelings I know. It takes up the entire interior. It leaves no room for anything else. I have been in that loneliness many times in the stories I've told you. On the Maverick Road with the flat tire, in the bridge line in Laredo, on the empty Corpus Christi beach in November, in the cottage in Kerrville at 10:15 at night. Each time in the center of it, there was that particular alone and afraid quality. The feeling of the world having expanded suddenly and unhelpfully, of the familiar human structures, the social, the legal, the communal having receded to a distance that felt impossible to cross in time. And what helped, every single time, was connection. The phone call to Marcus, the text to Sophie, the call to the non-emergency line, the conversation with the woman at the gas station in Marathon. These connections, these moments of bringing another human being into the situation, even minimally, even just as a presence on the other end of a phone, they changed the quality of the air. Not the facts of the situation, not the external circumstances, just the quality of the air, the sense of being witnessed, of not being entirely alone inside the fear. And that change was not nothing. It was not small. It was the difference between a manageable fear and a consuming one. I think we underestimate how much of our safety is communal. We talk about safety as an individual achievement, being brave enough, smart enough, prepared enough, and preparation matters. I've said that, I believe it, but the deeper safety is communal. It's Priya who sleeps in the room with the creaking floor and tells you what she heard. It's the woman on the trail who stops to tell you what she noticed. It's Marcus who stays on the phone for 22 minutes. It's Marilyn who calls the ranger station. That network of attention, that web of people who are aware of each other and willing to say the difficult thing when it needs saying, that is the real safety infrastructure. The individual courage and preparation rest on top of it, but they are not sufficient without it. And I think about this especially in the context of Texas, this state that prizes individual self-sufficiency so deeply, that has a genuine and real tradition of the lone person on a vast landscape making their own way. That tradition is beautiful in many of its forms. It produces a kind of resilience and directness and genuine self-reliance that I admire, but it can also make it harder to say, I need someone to stay on the phone with me right now. I need you to know where I am. I need to tell you about this thing I noticed because I might need you to have heard it. Those sentences can feel like weakness in a culture that prizes independence so heavily. They are not weakness. They are the most important sentences. They are the sentences that have, in my experience, made the actual difference. And I want anyone listening to understand that asking for them is not an admission of failure or fragility. It is the intelligent use of a resource that is available to you and that you would be foolish not to use. There is nothing more practical than connection. There is nothing more pragmatic than love. The second thing I've been circling is about place, about what it means to be in a specific place and to know it well enough to understand when something is wrong in it. This is related to what the old man at the Careville bench had, that depth of knowing that comes only from long residence and full attention. The way a place makes itself legible to you over time, teaches you its rhythms and its characters and its edges, so that when something is off, you feel it before you can name it. I have that now with New Braunfels. After 3 years, I know my neighborhood in the specific way of someone who is paying full attention. I know the dog that barks at the corner house at 7 every morning. I know the particular sound the commel makes when it's running high after rain. I know which neighbors keep late hours and which ones leave for work early. I know the way the light in my own apartment sits at each hour of the day. I know the sound my floor makes in every kind of weather. I know what belongs and what doesn't, and when something doesn't, I know it immediately in my body before the conscious mind assembles the evidence. That knowledge is not given. You earn it with time and attention. And once you have it, it is one of the most genuinely protective things. A person can have more than most weapons, more than most alarms, more than most technology. The intimate specific knowledge of your own place is the best early warning system that exists. Cultivate it. Pay attention to the ordinary until the ordinary becomes so familiar that any deviation registers before you've decided to look for it. Pay attention also to the places you're visiting for the first time. You won't have that deep knowledge, but you can build a rapid version of it. Note the exits. Note the people. Note the rhythms of the specific time you're there. Note what feels integrated with the place and what feels out of place. This rapid assessment becomes faster with practice. I do it automatically now, walking into any new space, any unfamiliar environment, not anxiously, not in a way that interferes with being present and open to the experience. Just a quick, clean accounting of what's there. The third thing. This one is harder to say because it runs against a story I'd like to tell myself. The third thing is that I have been lucky, and I know it, and the knowing makes me think about the people who were not. Because for every story I've told you tonight, for every road I got safely to the end of, for every night I got back to my own locked door, for every moment when the thing that could have happened didn't, there is someone else's story that ended differently. Someone who was on the Maverick Road with a flat tire and no spare. Someone who was in the bridge line in Laredo and didn't have a phone or didn't think to call. Someone who was in an apartment with devices in the walls and didn't find them. Someone who went on the night drive from Marfa. I think about them sometimes. The abstract population of people who had the same fear I had in the same situations, and for whom the outcomes were different. I hold them in my mind, not with the frozen horror of imagining specific faces and specific outcomes, but with a kind of active sorrow, a refusal to let the fact of my own luck obscure the reality that luck is not evenly distributed, and that the world's impunity towards certain people, in certain bodies, in certain circumstances, with certain amounts of financial and social and structural protection, is real and is ongoing, and is not something I can narrate my way around. What I can do, what any of us can do, is pay attention outward as well as inward. Be the person who says I see it too to someone who needs to hear it. Be the person who stays on the phone. Be the person who tells the ranger station, who calls the non-emergency line, who talks to Raw behind the bar, who tells the next hiker on the trail what they noticed. Be part of the infrastructure for someone else the way Marcus and Sophie and Priya have been part of it for me. That is the concrete, practical, daily version of what all of these stories have taught me. Not the abstract lesson about trusting your instincts or the philosophical meditation on fear. The practical human obligation: watch out for each other. Say the thing that needs saying. Don't let social discomfort keep you from extending the small but essential courtesy of information shared. You see something, you say something, not in the paranoid, overcautious way of treating every stranger as a threat. In the specific, careful, human way of recognizing when something is actually wrong and giving the people around you the benefit of your perception. That's the whole of it. Everything else, the stories, the atmospheres, the wide dark roads and the empty beaches and the old houses and the long starlit drives, all of that is the texture of the thing, the specific lived embodiment of it. But the core of what all of it amounts to is: watch out for each other, trust your body, say the thing, stay connected, know your place, and let your place know you. Be the person who stays on the phone. I've been in Texas for most of my adult life, and I have been frightened here, and I have been consoled here, and I have been astonished here. And the frightening and the consoling and the astonishing are not three separate things. They are all the same thing, which is being fully alive in a specific, real, enormous, complex, beautiful, dangerous, sacred place. Being a human person in a human world that is older and larger and stranger than any of us, and that will receive our specific small lives with perfect indifference. And also, in the particular moments when the light is right and you're paying the right kind of attention, with something that feels, if you let yourself feel it, very much like grace. That's the whole of it. I've been trying to say that all night in different ways, and that's the simplest form of it. The fear and the grace, held together, in the same hands, at the same time. That's the deal. That's Texas. That's being alive. Okay, now I'm done. Go to sleep. Let the night be gentle with you. Tomorrow the light will come back, the way it always has, the way it will long after any of us are here to see it, and it will find you still breathing, still present, still exactly the complicated, precious, unrepeatable person you are, and that will be, as it always is, and always has been, and always will be, enough. There is no fear that outlasts the body's need for rest, and no darkness that the river does not simply flow through on its way to somewhere open. I want to stay with you just a little longer, not because I have more stories exactly, but because there's a quality to this particular hour that I don't want to rush past. The hour just before sleep, when the defenses have softened and the mind is doing its work of filing and sorting and letting things settle, and the body is warm and heavy and ready to let the day go. This hour is one I've thought about more than most, because it's the hour when all of it comes back, sometimes. When the things that have been waiting quietly in the back of the mind surface gently, the way things rise to the top of still water when you stop disturbing it. I've had a lot of nights in Texas where this hour was complicated, where the settling into the dark brought with it the specific inventory of the day's fear, or the week's, or some older fear from some older night that had decided to be present again. And I've learned something about those nights, about what to do with that surfacing. The answer is not to push it back down. That doesn't work. Whatever is surfacing is going to surface on its own schedule, and wrestling it back into the depths just exhausts you and accomplishes nothing. The answer, I've found, is to look at it, not in the sharp analytical daylight way of trying to resolve and explain and conclude, in the softer way of the hour before sleep, the way you'd look at something you've found on a beach, picking it up, turning it over, feeling its weight and texture, understanding what it is before setting it down, not keeping it, not denying it, just acknowledging it. This was real. This happened. I felt this. It mattered. and then setting it down beside you and letting it rest there while you rest too. Because the fear, when you stop fighting it and stop feeding it and just let it be what it is, a feeling, a response, a true account of something real that the body registered and kept, it becomes manageable, not small, not dismissed, just manageable, just something you can be in the same room with, something that can sit beside you in the dark without consuming you. That's what I've learned to do with the man on the Maverick Road, and with Karen in the house on the right, and with the man in the bridge line, and with the shape in the Houston doorway, which I still don't know the shape of, and probably never will. I look at them, I feel their weight, I set them down. They don't go away entirely. Some things don't go away, but they become part of the archive rather than part of the present, and that distinction between what is past and what is now is one worth maintaining with some care. Right now, tonight, in this moment, you are somewhere safe, your body is warm, someone, somewhere, knows where you are. The morning is hours away, but it is coming with the same reliable patience it has always shown, indifferent to everything except the turning of the earth. These are the facts of right now. These are the true present tense. Let the stories be stories. Let the past be the past. Let the night do what the night is supposed to do, which is to hold you gently in the dark, while the body recovers, and the mind processes, and the world turns slowly under you, and the stars wheel in their ancient, undisturbed patterns overhead. You are safe, you are breathing, you are here, and there is no fear that outlasts the body's need for rest, and no darkness that the river does not simply flow through on its way to somewhere open. Sleep, now. The morning knows where to find you.